afternoon, colleagues. Please remain standing whilst my chaplain, Reverend David Gerard, leads the council in prayer.
Let us pray. Lord, we pray for this world. Where there is injustice, may you bend hearts towards mercy. Where people are suffering, may you bring your peace. Lord, in our nation, we pray for our leaders, that they may have hearts to desire the good of all. Give them your wisdom and hearts of compassion. Lord, we pray for our Metropolitan District of Wakefield, for all those that live here. May you bring unity and understanding between all people. May you help us to be a place where we look after one another. And Lord, we pray for this council, that all those here may represent those that they serve, that they may make decisions for the good of those who have elected them. May they put the needs of all above their own desires or party political interests. Lord, may you turn each of our hearts towards justice and compassion. Merciful Father, accept these prayers for the sake of your Son, our Saviour, Jesus Christ. Amen.
Thank you. Please be seated. Item 2 on the council summons is to receive disclosures by members of interest in matters under consideration. Will members declaring an interest please identify themselves and their particular interest clearly and complete the usual yellow form before the end of the meeting. Firstly, colleagues, are there any disclosable pecuniary interests to be declared? Are there any other interests to be declared? Councillor Wassell.
Yes, Mr Mayor, I'm a volunteer at the Food Bank and I think there's a resolution on the table today.
Thank you. Councillor Foster.
Mr Mayor, I'm also on the Management Board of Trinity Mission and a volunteer at the Food Bank.
Thank you, Councillor Foster. Are there any other interests to be declared? Agenda item 3 is to receive and confirm the minutes of the annual council meeting held on the 17th of May 2018. Are these minutes moved? Are the minutes seconded?
Second the minutes, Mr Mayor.
All those in favour? That is carried. Agenda item 4 is to receive apologies for absence. Apologies for absence have been received in advance of the meeting from Councillors Dagger, Mrs Mitchell and Mrs Garbett. If there are any further apologies, will you please identify the members concerned clearly, one after the other? Councillor Taylor.
Thank you. I'm afraid this meeting is still going on at 4 o'clock.
Thank you, Councillor Taylor. Councillor Long.
Thank you. Likewise, I'll have to leave meeting at 4 o'clock. I've got another meeting to attend.
Thank you, Councillor Long. Agenda item 5 is to deal with such announcements as I may decide to lay before Council. The Mayoress and I had a lovely day at the Royal Garden Party at Buckingham Palace on the 5th of June in the presence of the Prince of Wales and Princess Anne. On the 8th of June I held a civic reception for representatives of our twin town of Herne in the parlour of the Town Hall. It was a very enjoyable experience. I was delighted that so many of you could join me for my civic parade and service in Wakefield on the 9th of June. It was a fabulous day and I hope everyone enjoyed it as much as the Mayoress and I. I am looking forward to attending the Lord Lieutenant's annual garden party the High Sheriff's Summer Party and the Councillor General of Pakistan's Garden Party in the coming weeks. I was also honoured to be invited to Wakefield Theatre to celebrate the life and work of Wakefield-born World War I nurse Nellie Spindler. In addition to these, I will be attending school visits and citizenship ceremonies. I was delighted to see that work and talents of citizens living and connected with our district have once again been recognised in Her Majesty's birthday's honours. Professor John Lockheed received an OBE for services to research and development in the energy sector. David Dickinson, Chief Executive Officer of Waterton Academy Trust, received an OBE for his services to education. 2 senior West Yorkshire police officers have received recognition. Chief Constable D. Collins was awarded a CBE for services to policing and the British Association of Women and Policing, and Chief Superintendent Mabs Hussain was awarded an MBE for services to the police and to charity. In addition, Kate Hardcastle, co-founder of Insight with Passion, received an MBE for services to businesses. Wakefield-based foster carer Lorraine Long has been fostering for Leeds City Council for many years and was honoured with an MBE for services to children and families. And finally, Thomas Hurst received a British Empire Medal for services to the community in Wakefield. My congratulations to each of them and to all who received an honour this year. Thank you, colleagues, and that concludes my announcements. As no deputations have been received for today's meeting, we will now move to item 7 on the agenda, which is the Leader's Report. Once the Leader has presented his report, he will answer any questions from members on the matters raised in his report. A maximum of 30 minutes will be allowed for questions and answers. Councillor Box.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll try and be brief. We've got a large agenda today with several resolutions. Firstly, can I welcome all our new members on both sides of the chamber. I hope you enjoy being on the council. You'll find it slightly different being on the other side of the fence, as it were. It will be hard work, but we welcome you all here today. Can I also, Mr Mayor, ask that we send our condolences to the family of Harold Poynton, who I'm sure you know as a Trinity fan. Harold was, I think, the only captain of Wakefield ever to win the championship on 2 occasions. He won the Challenge Cup on 2 occasions, and he played over 300 games for Wakefield Trinity, and he was one of the superstars of the game. And I say that as a Cast Tigers fan, Mr Mayor. A real star. So I think we should send our condolences to his family. He was always immensely proud of being from Wakefield, and let everybody know where he was from. So I think we should do that. Can I also thank all those members in the chamber today who attended the Armed Forces Day in Pontefract Park on Saturday. I know you were there, Mr Mayor, in an unofficial capacity. Looking, well, I think from the jeans and t-shirt you were anyway, there was no gold around your neck. So just to thank everybody who was there. The weather kept kind for us, and yet again there were thousands of visitors were there to pay tribute to our armed forces. But in particular, can I thank Councillor Sandra Picking, who drives this forward every year. She's a star when it comes to making sure that our veterans and our service personnel are never forgotten. So a big thank you, Mr Mayor, to Councillor Picking. Well done, Sandra. Can I also say, Mr Mayor, that at the Local Government Association, we have been talking about the spending review that will take place in 2019. As you know, the LGA chair is the Conservative Councillor, Lord Porter, and there is cross-party support for having a campaign to make sure that we put a really strong submission into local government. The LGA estimates that if there's no government investment in local government, that the funding gap will be £7.8 billion by 2025. and that is a figure that's been agreed by the LGA Leadership Board, of which I am a member. So we will be, as LGA, asking all authorities to give evidence about what it means for different areas, about the savings we've had to make, and we'll be making a concerted effort to make sure that we put a very strong case to government. In addition, Wakefield at the moment holds the chair of the Key Cities Group, which is the 20 medium-sized cities in the country. We shall also be putting forward our submission to that spending review and making the case for more investment into medium-sized cities. I have to say that I think one of the mistakes that previous governments have made, both parties actually, is in concentrating resources in those larger cities, or the core cities. All the evidence shows, Mr. Mayor, that you can get a quicker return in terms of investment in the key cities. And I have to say that I've been speaking to ministers recently about that, and they seem open to that argument. So we've constantly got to make the case that the idea that the investment should go to those bigger cities is not feasible anymore. It has to be directed towards where you can get a bigger return in a shortest possible time. In terms of manufacturing, for example, manufacturing output is greater per head of population in the smaller cities as opposed to those bigger cities. So all the indicators show, and you can circulate them to every member of council, show that if you do a comparison between the core city group and the key cities on most of those indicators, then the key cities come out on top. In London next week, the key cities will be launching a new document, which is a direct appeal to government to work with them. I've made it clear as chair that we will be open to working with government if they want to pilot any scheme in terms of investment, that we are willing to be a pilot along with other key cities. That leads me nicely on to devolution. At the moment, there is no word from government on the submission that was put forward. People know my view in terms of what I think is the best model for Wakefield that will give us the biggest growth in the shortest time. That model is not on the table at the moment, and I know the concerns of government are twofold. The first is making the case for a single economy, which won't be easy. I think it's generally agreed that will not be easy to do because Yorkshire is a disparate county, and we're proud of it actually. In the past, we've always recognised there have been different economies within the Yorkshire boundary. So government is considering whether or not the economic case has been made, and there are also obviously concerns over governance to make sure that there is proper and effective governance in place. I will report back to Council again in July that clearly we need to consider devolution because we can't go on forever without any decision being made. But I say I will keep Council informed. And I have made the point, and I'll make it here today, Mr. Mayor, that any devolution model has to make sure that the resources made available follow deprivation. That has to be the case, that resources have to go where there's most need. Now, we know that in our district, in fact in every ward, at least in some part of every ward, there are levels of deprivation, some of which are increasing. We shall debate later on some of those issues in terms of the resolution on the agenda. So we need to make sure that we don't get a devolution deal that simply tries to share everything out on an equal basis between 18 or 20 councils. That is not the way forward. We have to make sure that it is focused where there is most need. You'll have seen in the press, presumably most members will have seen in the press this statement about Wakefield at Trinity. I'd made an announcement in December of last year with the agreements of the club, who were party to it, about the steps we were taking to ensure the long-term future of the club. Since then, officer colleagues have been talking both to the owner of Bellevue and to the club, and indeed to the developer at Newmarket. I've also been talking to the chairman of Wakefield Trinity about what might happen. We've always been mindful that if there were any issues arising from Bellevue, we should at the same time we're pursuing that option look at a plan B. So people will have seen in the press, there was some press speculation about a particular site in Bourne Lane, but we have been looking and working with the club to look at a potential plan B. So all those talks, Mr. Mayor, are still ongoing. I'm not sure who went to the press with it, but we had hoped both the council and the owner and the club that we could work quietly before any formal announcement was made. We're not yet in a position to make a formal announcement, but again, Mr. Mayor, I will make sure that every member of council is updated if there's a formal announcement before July, although I'm not sure in terms of the timescale whether that will be the case or not. But I can give an assurance that if it is the case, I will circulate as much information as commercially possible. And finally, Mr. Mayor, I'm not sure if members are aware, but this week is Refugee Week, the 18th to the 24th of June. And I noticed your chaplain talked about leaders having heart. I would suggest that I agree entirely with that. Maybe that's a message that would be sent across the Atlantic to Donald Trump. Because what is going on in America with those poor children who are being locked up in cages is an absolute disgrace. This is wrong, and this is not something we agree with, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions on Councillor Boxer's report? Councillor Ahmed?
Just a couple of questions on devolution. I think, as you mentioned, that we're going to come back with a report to the council on devolution. I think it's important that members are aware of what's been asked from the asks that were in that original report with the wider Yorkshire bid. So all members of the council and the public is aware that these are the powers. There's no point in having to deal without the necessary powers. I know you mentioned on there in terms of poverty, etc., there needs to be powers on that, but there needs to be the correct powers and the correct funding deal which makes that possible. So I would ask that the council, when we present the report to the council, it outlines exactly these are the things that the wider Yorkshire bid has asked for, the support that it's received, which is the wider support, cross-party support across Yorkshire, which wasn't available for the Leeds City region bid. I think I was the only Conservative that supported that. So basically it's looking at what the bid, what's been proposed to central government and what is entailed in there, and obviously, hopefully, we expect a response back on that. In terms of Wakefield Trinity, I think we've been a number of years in the council talking about Wakefield Trinity and the ground, but there's a lot of things that go on social media, which on the Wakefield Express report, which concern fans. There's a number of fans here that are sitting within the stadium and the wider. So I think for the fans, I think it's important that there is, when possible, that we do have a time frame that commits to building a stadium, whether it be in Bellevue, because Manny Hussain on social media is committing to remaining within Bellevue, and that's what he's put on there. That was 2 days ago, that he's committing to remaining within Bellevue and developing the current ground. So if that's the case, then maybe when is he going to planning, etc., it'd be important. There's commercial sensitivities, but that's his own ground at the moment, so there's no sensitivity on that because he's not buying anything. Where there is sensitivity of buying grounds, etc., I understand that, but it's important that the fans are aware of this is the day we're going to go to planning, these are the issues on there, and some sort of press release is done or information is given, so it puts at rest the fans' concerns that they're not going to get this stadium, because they've been waiting a lot longer than I've been a councillor. So it's important that the fans have some form of clarification, and this is what's actually happened, the Wakefield Express story, if it's true or not. We are looking at alternatives, so just so there's reassurance to the fans in there. So if you just clarify those 2 points, please.
In terms of devolution, look, my preferred choice is not a secret. It isn't. I strongly believe that the best deal for Wakefield is a Leeds City Region deal. It is not a secret. And I say that for two reasons. Well, for one overriding reason. And that is this, that it will give Wakefield the best chance to get the biggest amount of growth in the shortest possible time. That's why I passionately believe that a Leeds City Region model is best. Now then, the truth is that is not on the table at the moment. It isn't. But so we're going to be pragmatic. Because it's not on the table, we have said we will work with other authorities who think a different model is the best model. That's where we are. The truth is, when you speak to people from different parties privately, you get different views about from what they say publicly. And I'm not going to go into, revealing here confidences from those conversations. I think people, by and large, it wasn't an issue, certainly I found, raised on the doorstep during the election in May. I'm not sure if you did, but I didn't have many people saying, we're desperate for devolution and for more politicians. I honestly didn't. So I'm not sure it's grabbed the public's imagination yet. So look, you're right. I'll make sure that as much detail as possible can be circulated. I understood that the proposal that had been put to government was actually not a secret, it was online somewhere. I can certainly find out if that's the case and we can circulate it. But I say, let's wait and see what happens. I am led to believe that the government is finding it difficult at the moment to accept the economic entity argument. That's what I understand. I don't know, but this is second-hand. And they're also finding it hard to understand how the governance would work effectively. So those are the two big issues for the government. So what we need to do is to be involved in those talks, and we shall be. In terms of Trinity, I've no idea what is on social media because I stay off it, as you know. I'm not on social media. People come up to me and say, have you heard what they're saying about you? I said, no. Bother me. I'm not fussed what folks say about me on social media, so I don't read it. All I know is this, that unless you can get a really watertight agreement with whoever owns Bellevue, that can impact on the amount of rent that the club might have to pay. And that's the big issue. We've got to make sure we get a deal for Trinity so that they are financially viable. It's no good saying we'll build a stadium here, there or anywhere else if it can't be afforded, which is why we've said that we'll work with the club on a plan B. So I say this has their support, the plan B. What we need to do now is to look at whether we can get a business model that makes it viable. And we're going to do that, and we'll work as quickly as we can. But I say the club is happy about what we've done so far. They're happy about the steps that we've been taking, and I can assure you that is the case from the conversation I had this week. And you're right about the fans. The fans are the ones who get impatient. I'm a fan of Cass, so we all get impatient as fans. So you're quite right to raise that. And I say, as soon as we can make something public, then I promise you that we will do. There's no doubt at all about that.
Thank you, Councillor Box. Councillor Pickett.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. On behalf of all veterans and serving forces that attended on Saturday, I'd just like to say thank you, Peter, and to all council for all the support that they give to allow them to do that. To Andrew Bolston and Kelly, who does a lot behind the scenes for finances that help us keep viable. And also to Major Simon Teaky, who pulls everything together, and he does a fantastic job. But we also had a lot of our staff there on the day, and they were marvellous all day. And we've got 3 kids in street scene who I can't thank them enough, and that's Aidan, Mick and Jason, who kept that site spotless all day long. And when we left the site in the rain, there was nothing left on that site. It was spotless. So thanks to everybody involved and for supporting us from veterans. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any more questions to Councillor Box? Thank you, Councillor Box. We shall now move on to agenda item 8, which is to receive written Cabinet members' reports in accordance with Council Procedures Rule 14.1. Cabinet members have up to 5 minutes to present their report, and there are a further 15 minutes allocated to enable each Cabinet member to respond to any questions or brief comments on issues within their respective portfolios. First report is from Councillor Mrs Jeffrey. Councillor Mrs Jeffrey, will you please introduce your report to the Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a few things to add. Last Tuesday, I took a paper to Cabinet on the economic plan for the district. This is an exciting plan that will drive forward business and investment into our areas, but it also will include the poverty agenda to bring people forward, to take all of the district with us, not just for the exclusive business people and business moving forward, it's for everyone. We are setting on master plans for Nottingley, Pontefract and Castleford, and they're moving forward. There are 3 main towns. The other thing I wanted to mention was the local development framework. We've had great success with our local development framework over the last 5 years. Everybody wants to build in Wakefield, and I know that sometimes we don't always want them to do that. The public feel that perhaps we've had enough, but the investment that's coming through from the local development framework, from more building, is exceptional, and it's bringing investment into Wakefield. We're about to launch onto the next LDF, and I do urge members all to get involved. We should be holding workshops in July for members to know what's going on in their areas. There's quite a bit of an unrest, I think, out and about in the communities, where people feel that expressions of interest have been put in from developers and that it's a done deal. Well, it's far from a done deal. There's a long way to go before we end up doing that, but I want members to feel fully involved in what is being proposed. So you'll see some of the proposals for yourself when we have the workshops, and then in September the recommendations will go to the sounding board of the council, where we shall look at the recommendations and move it forward. So it's a long process, and it's planned then is for the next 10 years. So it is important that everybody gets involved in that. So I do ask you all to do that. And having said that, I move my report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Mrs Jeffrey's report? Thank you, Councillor Mrs Jeffrey. Next is the portfolio holder for adults and health. In the absence of Councillor Mrs Garbett, Councillor Mrs Collins, will you please introduce the report to the Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In presenting this report, and that last week was Carers Week, in that spirit I would like to draw everyone's attention to agenda page 13 of the report, and in there the Carers Digital Resource. Now, 1 in 8 people within our district are likely to be a carer, and 1 in 12 young people are likely to be carers. The worth of that nationally is £132 billion, and in Wakefield it comes to over £700 million. So the Carers Digital Resource has been brought in with a view to identifying who our carers are earlier on, so that these carers are able to access the support they need earlier, so that we're not reaching a crisis point. Often people within our district don't identify themselves as carers. I know from my own experience of looking after my granddad that I wouldn't have identified myself as a carer. I was just doing my duty of looking after him. But it's important that we do get this message out there, that people do understand that they are taking on a caring role and that we support them properly in doing so. So the digital resource has a number of tools on it. There's access to e-learning and training. There is an application called Jointly, which, if there is a circle of people sort of surrounding the care of one person, where it helps you to communicate sort of the day-to-day things that everybody needs to know. It also has sort of information and guidance on there on how to keep well, because it is important that our carers are looking after themselves. I know that all too well the focus is on the person that they're looking after, but we do need to make sure that, you know, that we're helping them to stay healthy as well. I would ask members of the council that they would look at the digital resource that's been sent round to everybody, and if you identify somebody within your area who you think might be a carer or is supporting someone, that you do share this. We are having a big launch of this sort of district-wide, so that we are getting information out there, but I think for us as a council to identify these carers and be able to put support in place immediately helps much more the person who's been looked after from going into a crisis point, and also from carers to reaching that point too. And with that, I move the report, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Mrs Collins' report? No? Sorry. Councillor Scott?
I'd just like to comment on the Dolly Parton Imagination Library collection that were held at Airedale Library in May, and comment on the staff there, because the staff there are absolutely fantastic. And this Imagination Library, a child gets a book free every month up until they're 5 years old, so long as they are within the age range that they can collect those books. And the staff are absolutely brilliant in advertising this fact and getting people in. So I think it's really important that people know that this facility is there, and people in Airedale and Ferry Fryston go and visit the library, and the staff are really, really committed to this and other things that other events that they put on. They are excellent members of staff. Thank you.
Are there any other questions or brief comments on Councillor Mrs Collins' report? Thank you, Councillor Collins. The next report is the portfolio holder for children and young people. Councillor Mrs Isherwood, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, in presenting this report, obviously the improvement journey, this has all moved on now. As members will be aware, we've had a full Ofsted visit, and the inspectors came in on the 4th of June for 2 weeks. It was a very intense time for everybody, and we've had an email gone out to all members on the 14th, 15th of June detailing what actually went on. I think after the focus visit, we have already done a lot of work. We've invested more money in the services. We've set on more social workers. We've set up more locality teams. We've added extra support for the newly qualified social workers. We've got a new care director, which is a data gathering system in place. To my mind, it's a bit unfortunate that the inspectors have come in so soon before we've had a chance to actually see how these things have worked and progressed. However, we are where we are, and we have to do what is best for our children and their families. So we will take on board all the lessons that we will learn, hopefully, from this visit. And I would just like to reiterate what Beate Wagner said in her email, that thank you to all the staff who have shown such professionalism and dedication during this very difficult process. We aren't allowed to comment actually on the report at the moment till it comes out on the 16th of June, but as soon as that is out, there will be a report that goes out to all members. Moving on from that, I'd like to mention the UK Youth Parliament results. And it's wonderful to see children involved in politics in this way, and congratulations to all those who won. As a result of talking to the young people there, Beate Wagner, myself and Richard and the Chief Executive have all been down to meet with the young people, and we all had the pleasure of being filmed doing the floss, which apparently is on the internet now, so if anybody wants to, although the Chief Executive actually did the hula hoop, so that would be quite fun. But with that, I would like to move my report. Thank you.
Are there any questions or brief comments on the report? Thank you, Councillor Mrs Isherwood. Next is the portfolio holder for corporate services. Councillor Shaw, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Looking at my report, first of all, I'd just like to thank the coroner, the outgoing coroner, David Hinchcliffe. As we pointed out in my report, he's served for 25 years in that position. And we can all see some of the high-profile cases that he had to deal with during that time. I won't even talk about the fact that he never had one day absence in all the 25 years, which is creditable, certainly by today's standards. So I'd like to wish him all the best wishes, certainly from me, and I'm sure from this chamber in future. And also welcome the new coroner, Kevin McLaughlin. Also within my report, on the last page, I think it's fantastic that this council is setting on 30 new apprentices. I think this is one of the issues that's been going on certainly in this country for a long time. We need to look at new skills, we need to look at new development, but it isn't just the fact that we're setting on 30 new apprentices, it's also the fact that we're looking into looked after children and children in need. Because not always do those sort of children look at advertisements, they don't know where to get a job and they don't know what to do. And I think it's credit to this council that we're looking right across the board. With that, Mr Mayor, I move my report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Shaw's report? Councillor Maltby.
The family firm, and I hope we can prioritise and support our looked after children to reap the full benefits of the wide range of opportunities that we can offer them.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or brief comments on Councillor Shaw's report? Councillor Isherwood.
Yeah, I mean, could I just say I think it's great. I mean, I'm a big advocate of apprenticeships. I was an excellent apprentice myself, along with a number of people in here. But unfortunately, the industries that used to provide the apprenticeships are no longer with us. And I think it's a sad reflection when it's actually a cabinet report that we're setting on 30 apprenticeships. When you look at the industry that we had, set on 30 apprentices a day across the whole engineering, mining, suppliers to the mining, all that. I do welcome it, and I must say that the council's apprenticeships are absolutely first rate and first class, and they're not these type of apprenticeships where they say, there you are, you're an apprentice store manager, go stacking shelves for 3 months until you get somebody else. So I'm always proud of this council for the part they play in the apprenticeship role, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or brief comments on Councillor Shaw's report?
Answer that, Mr Mayor. I think it is important, and I think Councillor Isherwood and certainly will take on board what you said. But apprenticeships, we're the fantastic industrial heritage around this area, in mining and in glass and in chemicals. And I remember when I was as an apprentice a number of years ago, the company I went to, they were setting on 30 and 40 apprentices every year. And there were real apprenticeships, and I'm proud to say that the council offer real apprenticeships and certainly learn the kids that come in about life and about skills. So thanks for that.
Thank you, Councillor Shaw. Moving on to the portfolio holder for Culture, Leisure and Sport. Councillor Miss Spade, would you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. In moving the report, I'd just like to highlight 1 or 2 items. The first is that I'm really pleased to say that Wakefield has purchased 3 Tova Patels, which is a Dutch word for magic table.
and these have been installed in libraries in Pontefract, Sandal and Normanton, and it's an interactive table that is used for activities for people with mid to late stage dementia. And it's really great that we're leading the way on this, because we're only the second library authority in the country to see that these can be used in public spaces in this way. The next item I wanted to mention is Robin's Community Garden in Normanton. My Deputy George opened this in May, and this is a project that began late last summer, and a group of volunteers have transformed an unused garden into a terrific space. So I'd really like to thank all of those volunteers, and it can now be used for children's stories and Pilates, but it's a great resource to have in Normanton. And finally, just by way of advert, I wanted to remind everyone that it's our very popular Licorice Festival coming up on the 8th of July, which celebrates everything licorice, and I hope you can all bob along. We've got 1 or 2 new things this year. It's because the fun will take place in the town centre, but it will also be happening at the castle, and we have a free licorice land train that you can take between the 2 venues, and I hope you'll pop along. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Miss Spade's report? Councillor Farmer.
Yeah, can I just congratulate yourself, Councillor Spate, on the new facility at Minstoke Leisure Centre. I actually went to see that. With reference to your quote, the new facility looks fantastic and is the high quality and modern leisure centre that our residents need and deserve. We now have a fantastic leisure centre in the south east. We have swimming baths in the centre of the town. Could you tell us when our modern leisure centre in the north west is going to be given? Because our residents certainly deserve and need that.
Councillor Burton.
Yeah, just briefly if I may, Mr Mayor, Jackie, the Nottingham Glassworks Festival, as you're aware, I attended one event along with yourself, an event for the under-5s. It was very, very well attended and enjoyed by a lot of children, parents, grandparents included. I dropped in on the Friday for the finale, if you like. So there were varying attendances, but there was another event that I did want to attend that were actually oversubscribed. So I think there are sort of evaluations to be done for next year. Hopefully we'll have a follow-up and learn from what went well this year. But thanks to the events team and everyone involved. It was a great success.
Councillor Scott.
Councillor Spate, thank you for mentioning the Tover Tackle table. We are also installing one at Airedale Library. Friends of Airedale Library asked the councillors to fund one through the capital grant, which we happily did, and that's going to be installed within the next few months, within 2 or 3 months. So hopefully then people around Airedale and Castleford will use the one at Airedale Library. And as I said, the Friends of Airedale Library and the staff at Airedale Library are just absolutely fantastic, and this is a brilliant resource across the district. Thank you.
Councillor Jones.
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. I just want to obviously draw attention to some things that obviously have been happening in Pontefract. And I know that a recent meeting I attended with some colleagues at the Pontefract and Arms Houses Trust, how much the residents there had appreciated actually providing their eyewitness comments, which has gone into the booklet, describing what obviously life was like in Pontefract a few decades ago. They really appreciated their involvement in that. And equally, the number of positive comments that have been made about the refurb of Pontefract Museum over in recent weeks. I think I also want to draw attention to the siege weekend which took place recently at the castle, and it was nice to be talking to people who've come from all over the country to spend the sort of time of the weekend at the castle, taking part in the different activities. And also just to mention that there is opera in the castle this Saturday night. I think there are tickets still available. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Are there any other questions or brief comments on Councillor Spate's report? Councillor Isherwood.
Yeah, well, while everybody's blowing their own trumpets about what's happening in their own wards, I think I might as well have a little peg here. Featherstone is now the cultural centre of Wakefield, as everybody knows. There's old castles up and down, but there's nothing like we've got in Featherstone. And I would actually ask people to come and have a look at our fantastic, nationally acclaimed Warhorse. That is the first phase of that programme, and there's a lot more going on that site. So you can blow your horns about your tables and your licorice fairs, castles and museums, or whatever you want to blow your horn about. Come to Fev. That's where it's all happening. Thank you.
Councillor Spade.
Thank you everyone for those positive comments, and Glenn, certainly what happened at Nottingham we are seeing as a bit of a trial and see how we can develop more outreach type of cultural outreach work across the district. Councillor Farmer, I wish we weren't in a time of austerity. I wish we'd got a glut of funds so that we could put another pool in the northwest. It would be my dear wish if we could do it. However, with a bit of luck, your area should have quite good accessibility before too long to a community stadium. So I hope that you will see as something as a boost. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Spade. Next report is that from the portfolio holder for Communities and Environment. Councillor Mrs Cummins, will you please introduce your report to Council?
Yeah, thank you, Mr Mayor. Just a couple of points to pick up on. We've just had Volunteers Week and we held 3 events across the district, and I'm pleased to say that during those 4 events with 379 people through the door and 54 active people who want to come and volunteer. I want to thank you, Mr Mayor, for coming to the Elizabethan Gallery and actually opening Volunteers Week. It was really well appreciated, particularly by the Senior Citizens Choir from Horbury. So thank you very much. And those 54 expressions from volunteers have since been followed up. I was at the Third Sector meeting yesterday and all those that want to volunteer have been contacted. I'm sure you've all seen the press release today about the conviction we've had for fly tipping, another £400 the council have received for illegal fly tipping across this district, and I know from the statistics I received that we're getting more and more complaints and we are finding more and more evidence within the items that have been fly tipped, and my plea is that keep reporting it, don't disturb it, keep reporting it, let our operatives get out there, let's see if we can find the evidence so we can continue to prosecute. And nobody's mentioned it yet, but we're in the throes of the World Cup. England was successful in their first match, but I want to draw people's attention to the fact that during major sporting events we do have a spike in domestic abuse, and that's why the Community Safety Partnership, in partners with the police, WDH, the fire service and probation service, have actually funded a campaign, and you may see it over the next couple of weeks on the side of our bin wagons, massive Stop Domestic Abuse posters that are on there. So, and that's encouraging people to come forward if they suffer domestic abuse, to actually ring and get the help that they deserve and require. And with that, Mr Mayor, I move my report.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Mrs Cummins' report? Councillor Mrs Taylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. With regard to fly tipping, Maureen, I do find, I've had several people complain to me about the queues at the waste site on Denverdale Road. And I've actually been there and been the result of, I don't know how many cars. The cars turning left are back right up to the roundabout. The cars waiting to turn right are right back under the bridge. Now then, we're expecting people to join these queues that take nearly an hour to get into the site. That's if they haven't had a bump because they're fighting to get in through the gate between turning left and turning right. But when I've done it and other people have done it, they've given up, they've gone home, they'll come back during the week, and it's not much better. These new household waste places were supposed to make things a lot better, and all they've done is just made total chaos. That's why we're getting fly tipping all over, because there's nowhere to put the stuff. People aren't getting, all right, it's not, you don't do that. I wouldn't do it. I'd still queue, but there are an awful lot of people wouldn't bother. Not only that, but the sites, I know the one on Denbydale Road, closes at 4 o'clock the year round. Now, when we had the local ones, they closed at 5 o'clock in the summer. Why not open until 6 o'clock? These people are trying to get rid of the rubbish, and they can't get rid of it. And I would actually say that the site on Denbydale Road is not fit for purpose, because once you get in, you're jammed in. You're there, and there's only room for one car to wait for one of the skips. And if that car can't go straight in, the whole queue is backed up because of it. It really is not fit for purpose. And I think we should have a waste service that is fit for purpose. Bring back the local ones if we can't manage to get those any good, the big ones any better. Sorry.
You've obviously had a bad experience in a queue trying to get into Denbydale Road there, Councillor Taylor. Thank you for highlighting the fact that people are taking their rubbish to the refuse tips, albeit that they may have to wait in a queue somewhere. And I can assure you, Councillor Taylor, that the Denbydale Road and all the other waste recycling centres are open 3 nights a week late. I'm not sure that you're aware of that, but I will send it round to everyone. They do have late openings. The 2 waste sites that we have, the one at, well, 3, the one at Denbydale Road, the one at Glasshouse and the one at down in South Kirby, are all reporting increased waste recycling there. It is easier to get in my opinion, and you're entitled to yours, Councillor Taylor, in my opinion, it is easier to go and put your waste, your household waste or your recycling into any of the 3 centres. I'm sorry that you feel it's not fit for purpose. You've obviously had a bad experience. I can only apologise for that, but they are really fantastic centres. People do like them, and they are open late at night, and I will circulate that information to you.
Councillor Crew.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to congratulate Maureen on the Hungry Holiday Hunger. We call it Hungry Holidays in Airedale, where we feed over 100 kids once a week in the school holidays. It's fantastic to see them there, and we'd like to get out more to the people, to the kids that deserve it more than some in our area, and we're finding it difficult to get in contact with them. We keep getting knocked back by other services, so I'll have a word with Maureen about that after, but it's fantastic what we're doing with the kids.
Thank you for that, Yvonne, and you're absolutely right. It's a shame that we have to do it, but we are doing it. We are ensuring that our kids are fed during holidays with the minimal resources that this council has, so thank you.
Councillor Graham.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maureen, this item about volunteers are very close to my heart. Most of the work I do is because I work with volunteers so well. And volunteers are not paid, not because they're worthless, but because they're priceless. It's such a true comment. I'd like to go on about the volunteers and Numala Dam, and the second time that this wonderful boardwalk has been burned. And I was just going to ask, is there any movement in technology that when a place has been targeted more than once, that maybe we can fund some cameras, I don't mean CCTV, but any smaller type cameras as technology moved on? Do you know of any schemes that are there so that we don't lose the volunteers because they're knocked back so many times?
Thank you, Monica. And yes, I mean, you and I have walked that boardwalk. We walked it the first time that it was put there, and then sadly I think this is the third time that somebody's tried to torch it. I do know that we are working with the volunteers at the moment to ensure that the boardwalks are going to be replaced and put back with hopefully something that might be a bit more substantial, and we will continue to work with them because we're nothing without the volunteers across this district for a lot of things, and particularly around our parks. With regard to your second question around CCTV, maybe you and I can have a discussion about that afterwards.
Councillor Pickering.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Maureen, I welcome the news of somebody else being found and fined. And I think we should maximise the fine up to about £4,000. In Scotland, not long since, their maximum fine on lampposts is up to £40,000 for fly tipping. As we know, this week we've had another load at Ellsworth, and last week, and Graham has enticed quite a few on my Facebook page by giving his remarks. I hope we can find something where we can find them more, and we do need some surveillance because they're just going back time and time again in our ward to the same patch.
Yeah, there are many spots across our, particularly our rural areas, and I follow your Facebook page and see your dumping ones as well, and I know that you report it and are on top of it. Sadly, people will load their cars up or their vehicles up, and they'll go and find a quiet spot, and they'll, rather than go to the loading station, and of course we've had the views on the loading stations earlier on, but rather than take it there, they'll go and find a lay-by to dump it in. We've got it specifically in our ward, in Ward 5, because it's a rural ward. But the more we can engage with the public and get them to report it, then the more that we're going to be able to actually find these people and bring them to justice. With regard to your covert watching and CCTVs, I think it's something that members can actually look at through their capital funding.
Councillor Byford.
Technology is a wonderful thing. During Councillor Taylor's rant, I had a look at the opening hours for the waste transfer station on Denbydale Road. Monday to Thursday till 5, Friday till 8, Saturday Sunday till 4, and bank holidays 8 in the morning till 5 at night.
Thank you.
Councillor Wood. Councillor Wassell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd just like to compliment Maureen on organising the Volunteers Week. I attended the one at Trinity Mission while I was there as a volunteer feeding the needy of Castleford, so I popped in as well. And I do appreciate the appreciation of volunteers. I'm not looking for thanks on my behalf, but the other volunteers that work tirelessly in this district to deliver various services. I don't think they always get the thanks, recognition and appreciation of the hours and time and effort that they put into it, and dedication, if I want to use another word. And at least it says in there that they're not worthless, they are priceless. And that's the only way we will get more volunteers, which we are sadly all fighting for. We're all fighting for the same volunteers, whether it's up at Mining Museum or River and Canals Trust or Trinity Mission down Castleford. We all want more and more volunteers because the need, sadly, is increasing. On the fly tipping, earlier this week in Kirkthorpe, next to the stocks, which I think is a valuable asset to this community, an area, mattress, pile of crap. That's within a mile of a recycling centre that sadly closed at Welbeck. And rather than go to Castleford or Denbydale, they still prefer to dump down Kirkthorpe.
Any comments? Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Obviously I support all the comments more about fly tipping, and well done for the prosecution, and as Sandra said, more please, if we can, by the law. Could you allow me a little bit of licence on this one, because in the same vein, it's dumping of rubbish. And there are areas within all our wards, I'm sure, and I'll be bringing one to the attention of Street Scene as soon as I leave here today, of where back access to terraced houses is being used for dumping mattresses, fridges, bags of rubbish, you name it. and that is equally a blight on the community around as it is in large fly-tipped areas. And there's a view out there in certain parts of the community that when it's cleaned up, which it has been several times, then that's how you get rid of it, because they'll come back and clean it again. And I would appreciate, Maureen, if through your services, that in the areas where the cleaning has happened and then you're going to go back again, that some consideration is given, A, which has happened before, to further strong leafleting in perhaps 1 or 2 languages, in case there are people whose first language isn't English. And secondly, I'm wondering if there's anything in the legislation in terms of this particular dumping of waste, household, etc. Is there anything that we can actually look to other authorities in terms of how they've dealt with it? Can we impose, having found any evidence, or indeed witness evidence, of imposing strong fines? Because this is a huge, huge cost to your department, Maureen, and well done for the efforts that you do in trying to reduce it.
You're absolutely right, Betty, but it's a blight across the country, isn't it? Now, I know that there are 1 or 2 areas, certainly within the city centre, and probably your ward and Olivia's ward, that suffer from, we'll go, we'll clean it up once and for all, we'll write to them, we'll tell them, and then we look again, and we know where it all is. But certainly take your views back to Glyn and the team, and we'll certainly look to see if there is any more robust legislation that we can actually use. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Mrs. Cummins. The final Cabinet Member report is that of the portfolio holder for Transport and Highways. Councillor Morley, will you please introduce your report to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Mr Mayor, something that's not in naturally in my report, but I do want to raise it. Councillor Picking raised it at Council a couple of meetings ago. It's the increase in thefts of gullies grates. Prior to 2013, before the government introduced the Scrap Metal Dealers Act, it was costing this council somewhere in the region of £500,000 a year to replace them. Once that legislation came into being, the theft of them stopped altogether, basically. We've seen an increase this year, already of nearly 250 being stolen, somewhere in the region of £50,000 it's cost the council. I'm asking all residents, all members, everybody in this district to be vigilant. It's our taxpayers' money that's being wasted by these thefts of people, and the cost to replace them, but also somebody's buying these that shouldn't be buying them, Mr Mayor. So I ask all people to please be vigilant on that. Mr Mayor, I'm pleased to say that the Kirkgate scheme is nearly all but completed. Been driving through there quite a bit over the last few weeks. Traffic seems to be moving through there a lot slicker, a lot better. The jury's out on the fake grass. Some people like it, some people don't. I'm trying to help Councillor Cummins out there in a revenue spend. She doesn't have to cut any grass down there. We shall see how durable it is and how long it lasts down there. But like I say, green's my favourite colour. I love it. I think it's very, very bright. But it's a fantastic scheme. It's the first of a couple of more schemes we've got for Wakefield City Centre. We've got the Bar Lane, Newton Bar scheme to be coming on board hopefully very soon, and also the Ings Road scheme as well to make traffic flow around the city even better. So with that, I formally move my report, Mr Mayor. Thank you.
Are there any questions or brief comments on Councillor Morley's report? Councillor Wassell.
How green is my valley? Plastic grass. I would like to compliment the portfolio holder on the delivery of the Methley Bridge to Fairies Hill Lock walk. I've walked it when it was a quagmire, I walked it when it wasn't fit to walk, I walked it with the portfolio holder when it was a concept, and I've since walked it and it's been delivered. It's an excellent opportunity to get out there, get some fresh air and get your steps in. It is phase 1, I believe, and I will be looking forward to phase 2 and 3, which will extend this walkway, and I believe you'll be able to go from City Centre Castleford and come out in City Centre Wakefield and various other bits and splinters off from it into Methley and various other places. I believe it's mostly funded by the Combined Authority, so I'd like to thank them as well. and yourself for bringing that money into the district and delivering on a project that has been close to my heart for many, many years. Used to walk that 63 years ago, so I'm still walking it. And it's the best it's ever been.
Well, it's taken me 6 years, but I finally got a compliment out of him. Thank you very much, Alan. And you are right, it's opened up a massive part of the river. I walked it myself last Monday. Me and my other half went out for a little stroll. I didn't realise we were going to be out till nearly 10:30 at night, walking down there, visiting maybe a pub on the way back. But it was absolutely fantastic. It's opened up the riverbank, and it was so well used. The amount of people on there on bikes, people running on there, people walking on there. And let's just remember, there's been some criticism of this. This money was for cycle routes. If we had not got this money, it would have gone to Leeds, Bradford, Calderdale, Kirklees. So why not spend it in our district and making a fantastic walk and opening up some of our riverbanks and some of our other areas. It's fantastic. And I totally agree with you, Alan. Thank you.
Councillor Tully.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Can I just take this opportunity through you, Matthew, to thank and the vote of thanks to the people in my ward who worked tirelessly to make the Tour of Yorkshire weekend again a great success. Lots again volunteers, people coming out to hang a bit of bunting and put a few bikes out and just make it a great success. Because while you talked about a lot about progress in the city centres, and I drove through Wakefield the other day. I don't do a lot of driving, I do a lot of public transport, but on this occasion I did. It's like an Axminster carpet, and when you get to the side of Nostell Priory, it's like being in a war zone with potholes. So, you know, where I accept there's a lot of issues in and around austerity, can I just ask that if we can get the Tour de Yorkshire to come back to Southampton and the surrounding areas, we'll welcome it with open hands, because at least on that occasion we get as road surface for the bikes to go across. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Councillor Tully. Just remember, though, there's no funding comes with the Tour de Yorkshire. You are right. It's down to volunteers, town and parish councils, community groups that really do step up and make sure that the district looks fantastic and organises the bunting and the the posters and everything like that. But when we do sit down with the Tour de Yorkshire organisers and look at the routes, we do look about what work we're going to do on them roads over the next couple of years, months, and maybe do sometimes to fetch the work forward. So the roads are fit for purpose in one respect, to make sure that no one's falling off the bicycles. But if you want, we can make sure there's a Tour de South Ensel, South Kirby maybe, around there, in a month.
If there are no further questions or brief comments on Councillor Morley's report, thank you, Councillor Morley, and that concludes the Cabinet members' reports. Agenda item 9 is to consider a report regarding the final overturn position for the 2017-2018 financial year for the revenue budget and capital programme. Apologies. Agenda item 9 is to consider a report regarding the final outturn position for the 2017-2018 financial year for the revenue budget and capital programme. Is the report moved? Is the report seconded? Are there any questions in relation to the report? Are there any comments? All those in favour of the recommendation? Any against? Any abstentions? That is carried. Agenda item 10 is to deal with any questions made by members. No questions have been received. The final agenda item is to deal with any motion proposed by members in accordance with council procedure rules as set out in the Constitution. There are 3 motions in total. Councillor Box, would you please move the first motion to council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. A few weeks ago I met a representative of the Jewish Council from Leeds who asked to see me to speak about the rise in anti-Semitic incidents right across the country. And during that conversation she asked me if the council would be prepared to put a resolution on the agenda condemning anti-Semitism. I informed her that I felt that that would have cross-party support. I also explained to her that when I was about 9 or 10, I was given a book, The Scourge of the Swastika, by Lord Russell of Liverpool. And it was one of the books that had a profound effect on me during my life. For those who've not read it, read it. You'll see catalogued there the attempts made by the Nazis in Germany to wipe out the Jewish population, not just in Germany, but right across Europe. The frightening thing is, they came very close to doing that. If the war hadn't finished when it did, almost certainly every single member of the Jewish community would have been killed. And if you look at the conditions in which those poor people killed, over 5 million people were killed in the most barbarous way imaginable. And it was called The Final Solution. There was actually a chapter in the book called The Final Solution. I'm very pleased that we are able to put this resolution on our agenda today, and I'm absolutely certain that it will attract all-party support. But I want to make a couple of other comments and slightly broaden the discussion, if I may. The truth is that my party has been criticised in the media recently for not being swift enough to take action against allegations of anti-Semitism. Conservatives have been accused in the press of not dealing with Islamophobia. I think that every single member of this council would hope that our respective parties nationally will take the speediest action possible against any incidents of either kind. And it's important that we locally make our views known. I've talked about the Holocaust, the killing of 5 million Jews. And the reason it's important we talk about this and we debate it, we never ever forget it. We've got to make sure we learn the lessons from history. Sadly, the evidence appears to be that we don't. Look at what happened in 1985 in Srebrenica. 8,373 Muslims were killed during the Bosnian War. Look at what's happened in 1994 in Rwanda. The Hutus killed about 1 million Tutsis during racial genocide. We've always, because of the fact that we haven't learned, we've always got to be prepared to stand up and make a stand and say where we locally stand. And I say I wanted to broaden it out because when we've had incidents in this district, these awful letters have been circulating, punish a Muslim. I've come here to council and I've condemned that on behalf of all of us. So we condemn any anti-Semitic behaviour. We condemn any Islamophobia. We condemn any kind of behaviour of that kind wherever it arises. And it's important that we do that. Irrespective of people's race, religion or sexual orientation, we have to be a council that is known for standing up for what is right. So I'm proud, Mr. Mayor, to be able to move this resolution today and to say that we locally will do what we can. I believe that this city and this district is a tolerant place. We've shown that over the years. We're a tolerant place and we want to remain so. And we've got constantly to make it known what our collective view is. It's not me representing my party. It's all our views from whatever party. So I hope, Mr. Mayor, that every single person will be able to support this resolution today, and that we can give an assurance to every single resident in this district that we will defend them against any behaviour of this kind whenever it takes place. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Box. Is the motion seconded? Councillor Tully? In seconding the motion, do you wish to formally speak now or reserve your right to speak later in the debate?
I'll speak now. Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I haven't got any difficulties at all supporting this resolution. I think it's long overdue. 43 years ago, I was in Suez and saw the remnants of war and war between Israeli and Egyptians and Arabs, which eventually went on to take control of the Golan Heights, which has been a long sore and bone of contention in that part of the world for the last 40 plus years. And before that, with the formation of Palestine in 1948. I've travelled quite a lot in the Middle East and been to places like Lebanon and Syria before it became the hellhole that it is now. And I've called out suppression of people, whatever we have found it. As a member of this party for over 40 years, I can go back to the 70s and early 80s when we used to have fraternal guests at Labour Party conferences, and I remember the likes of Shimon Peres and other Labour Party members from Israel coming. So when we call things out for what they are not attacking people, it is our right to call violence and the suppression of people for what it is. We are being labelled anti-Semitic from wherever it comes. And as someone who has spent most of his political life campaigning for a two-state solution, amongst other things, I think it's important that as a council, take the party politics out of this issue and come together unanimously to support this resolution. If the national parties are going to drag their feet and dealing with it, well, that'll not be the first time. Because often in this council chamber, we've often called out things that we don't accept, when sometimes our party might well have been in power and could have done something about it. But we're entitled, as Democrats, to call out violence, suppression, murder against our fellow human beings because we are supposed to be Christians. And I take on board what the leader said about the book he spoke about in his contribution to this debate. And it's worrying because we now see a rise of the horrible word fascism and hatred across Europe and certainly across North America as we are today. I don't want to steer away from the contents of the resolution, but I think we need to bear it in mind when we look at issues that's happening in Italy and what's happening in Germany today and what happened a few days ago with poor migrant people trying to come and find a better life out of war-torn parts of the Middle East, which have been stricken by war and suppression. So I've got no difficulty, proud and privileged to second this resolution, and I'm proud that this council can set a benchmark and set the lead for other authorities. And if the national parties want to follow us on, we'll get on with it, but let's us set that agenda rolling today, and I urge everybody in this council to come behind the resolution and support it unanimously. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tully. Does any member wish to speak on the motion? May I remind members that speeches must be directed to the question under discussion or to a personal explanation or point of order, and that no speech may exceed 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In terms of the motion, I didn't present an amendment, although I did feel that was, in terms adopting words sometimes and Because if we look at the Equal Pay Act and discrimination, all these things have been adopted in this country a long time ago, but there is a gap between gender pay inequality that exists, regardless of definitions being adopted. United Nations adopting the on Romas, still there's discrimination going on here. So I do think there is a problem within politics around certain areas of anti-Semitism and Islamophobia. And it was Saeed Awasi who raised that, and the Wakefield Express covered it as well within the Conservative Party. But I think that in terms of anti-Semitism, there is, the Labour Party is being drawn nationally, and I think that is important that I draw attention to that as well. And I would draw the same attention within the Conservative Party as well. In terms of supporting the motion, I've supported the motion. I'm part of HEP, Holocaust Educational Trust, and as a teacher, we make sure that we cover all our schools that we sign up to. Our trust does as well, that every pupil goes through the Holocaust Memorial Day, is represented in school, and every single one of the school represents that as well. And within the council, I think that's important that we do that as well. So when the Holocaust Education Trust, I attended Auschwitz with Fabian Hamilton, a Labour MP in Leeds, and it was the reality of visiting a death camp or a concentration camp in that case is a reality that stays with you for a long time, especially when we've taken pupils there. And you don't arrive to a point of killing people without going through a certain process. And the word Semite actually covers Arabs as well, so Arabs would consider, I've been to Saudi Arabia, and a lot of the Arabs have said that they're Semites as well. So actually, the definition goes beyond that. So it is definition, Arabs would consider, Arab speakers, Hebrew speakers, Aramaic speakers consider themselves to be Semites as well. So that definition is a broad definition, but I do think that there is certain things in that motion that the Labour Party nationally, with your own members, have come up and expressed concern. Likewise, certain Conservatives have expressed concern about Islamophobia. So it's important that we, as local politicians, identify that, draw it out. So, for example, Luciana Berger spoke in Parliament about issues that she suffered from within the Labour Party itself, criticisms that she's had. There's been certain campaign posters depicting Michael Howard as a Fagin character. So within politics, both parties, and we've allowed certain terminologies to pass over, certain wording to pass over, Islamist. What's an Islamist? Or Semite, all these words that we've passed over, that certain words have become definitions that certain politicians have started using and speaking, have allowed that certain wording, because you don't end up with genocide by accident. You end up with wording. When certain politicians, there might be local ones as well, I'm not aware of them, but we draw attention to the fact that certain politicians need to be called out for that sort of language, whether it be whoever that politician might be, a Conservative or a Labour person. So in terms of the motion, I agree with it, but I think we need to make sure that we challenge. We can't just say that there's a problem within X party or Y party without drawing attention to it and drawing out that problem. We need to say where the problem is. So if there is a problem within the Labour Party or the Conservative Party, I'm not bothered, I'll call it out. If someone's got a problem within the Conservative Party, they can address that with me. So if there was a problem, I think there is a problem within the Labour Party, they've identified that, and they need to address that within the party. John Mann, not Jewish, but he's been victimised because of the name sounding Jewish. And he said that's from within his own party. Is that acceptable in this day and age, just because certain people, and he's gone as far as his family? There's a recorded interview there's a recording in Parliament where he speaks about the issue where his family have been victimised, anti-Semitic abuse given to him. Now we can't allow that. I agree with adopting the definition and everything at a local level, but we have to challenge the national parties as well to get the house in order. And I think that's important that we do that here at this local level, and also raise this to Labour and Conservative Party and Liberals, whoever it is in the local government, because they have much more power and influence than we do at a local level, to make sure that certain terminology, wording does not exist within Parliament, whether it's social media, online, that MPs, whoever they are, whatever party, whatever member of any party, if they're using Islamophobic, any racist language, we call upon it, we draw it in, and it's investigated properly, and if that person's found to be in contempt, that they're basically kicked out of the party straight away. Every party should be doing that. I think that's important that I do that.
Councillor Abbott, 10.
Okay, that's fine.
Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I wasn't going to say anything, but I support this motion. And really, from my family, I feel privileged to be here today. When my grandma spoke to me many, many years ago, in 1944, her and my grandfather fled France because of all what was going on, what's written in this document. They fled to the Channel Islands, and then they had to flee again to Yorkshire. So I know what's gone on, what the history is, and some of the things that I was told as a teenager from my grandparents was horrendous. And I fully support this motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I support this motion as well. I mean, I'm like Councillor Box. I used to read about the Holocaust and the final solution, and I think we all were, you know, most moved by what happened, and, you know, it was wicked, the anti-Semitism that took place in Germany. And I thought that I knew an awful lot about this, and then I went to the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem. And if you look there at what's displayed, you know, all the articles that were taken, the little suitcases, the children's memorial garden, it brings it home to you exactly what happened in the Holocaust. And anybody that denies the Holocaust or tries to cover it up, you know, is sadly mistaken. And I think, you know, we must agree with what's said here. And you know, again, discrimination against any group. But to, you know, to actually visit the Holocaust Museum in Jerusalem is an experience that I don't know whether anybody else has been there, but it's an experience I will never forget. And I could hardly walk round. You have to do it in two sections. Not that it's split into two sections, but you're so overcome with emotion that you can't go and look at any more till you've had a break. And that was the experience that other people with me had as well. So I would support any motion that speaks against anti-Semitism or racial discrimination in any quarter. Thank you.
Are there any other speakers on this motion? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I obviously, like my colleague, but I was not going to say anything this afternoon, but a few things have sort of crossed my mind, and that is, of course, is that one of the big issues here is about education and educating people on a regular basis. And obviously, like colleagues in here, I've visited Auschwitz as a ex-history teacher. I taught the subject every year, and I was asked this year to go into primary school to talk about the subject because the staff didn't feel comfortable with it, which I then did. One of my concerns now is that with the way in which the curriculum in secondary schools is moving, that there is a danger that Holocaust studies is actually going to disappear because of the way in which in year 9 lots of children now start the GCSE courses, and if it's in particularly in history, then obviously the numbers doing that is reduced. So I think it is important that we continue to revisit and draw attention to these issues about anti-Semitism. And I agree with the Leader of Opposition, Islamophobia. It's absolutely vital that we just do not forget this, and we do fight it, and we continue to remind people about it, because there is a danger it could slip off the agenda if we don't watch it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor. Are there any other speakers on this motion? Councillor Box, as mover of the motion, you have the right of reply. In exercising your right of reply, may I remind you that no new matter can be introduced.
Just very briefly, just to thank everybody for their support. Councillor Ahmed is right. There are problems, certainly perceived problems, in both parties. My party, as I has been accused of not taking anti-Semitism seriously, and in the Conservative Party, they've been accused, and Baroness Darcy has written to the Prime Minister asking her to launch an inquiry into Islamophobia in the Conservative Party. both national parties, as Councillor Tully said, have a responsibility to act quickly. But I say it's important that we unanimously pass this and, you know, urge our parties nationally. It's quite right. Quite right. I mean, I don't want to get into name calling about which other councillor said this. I mean, there's one example where a Conservative councillor has been suspended, quite rightly, I'm sure Councillor Ahmed would agree, for saying it's unbelievable a Muslim's been elected mayor in London. You know, and I think both parties have recognised the need for urgency. I think both parties have actually suspended now either councillors or candidates. So, irrespective of all that outside of Wakefield, it's important that we take a stand, irrespective of that, and please vote for this resolution.
Thank you. Councillor Box. I'm going to move to vote. Please show all those in favour of the motion. Thank you. Please show those against the motion. Any abstentions? That is carried. The second motion is from Councillor Mrs Cummins. Would you please move your motion to Council?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'd like, with your permission, to alter the motion, taking into account some of the comments made by the Tory opposition. And I would like the motion to read, and I will let the clerk have the amendment after, and it will read, to ask the Council's Overview and Scrutiny Management Board to commission a full investigation into the use of food banks and food aid providers across the Wakefield district, including links between food bank use and universal credit and benefit freeze, and to report back to the October's full council meeting with the aim of being better prepared to meet the needs of the residents of Wakefield district who may use the service prior to the commencement of the rollout of universal credit in this area, and to further report back again in the new year on the effects following universal credit's introduction in November 18. And in moving the altered resolution, which is self-explanatory, I want to first of all pay tribute to the 19 volunteer-led food banks we have across the district. Volunteers not only provide parcels but much needed help and advice, pathways for the homeless, transport vouchers and emergency electricity cards. I'm also proud of this council who 2 years ago recognised that people were turning more and more to food banks for short-term help. The council, through the Welfare Fund, provided a small amount of funding for the food banks, should they have white good failures or want to sign up to the Trussell Trust, who provide food that supermarkets and retailers have in excess. It's a sad situation that we are in, and it's only going to get worse. When the Tory government introduced universal credit in our district in November, as the information before you suggests, the food bank usage has increased in our district by 32%. And to put that into exact terms, that's 15,531 food parcels in 2016-2017, up to 20,500 in 2017-18. Staggering, and it's set to go up by a further 52% over the next 12 to 18 months. No one wants to be in this situation, and no one should be told that it's uplifting visiting a food bank. And I do wonder if Jacob Rees-Mogg would feel uplifted visiting a food bank. Theresa May said, when told that nurses are using food banks, there are many complex reasons why people go to food banks. And I would say to Mrs May, pay these angels the money they deserve, and they wouldn't have to visit food banks to help feed themselves and their families. Our children should have access to nutritious food 365 days a year. I believe children deserve a better start in life. Childhood hunger shouldn't be allowed to have a damaging impact on their health, attainment and opportunity. Lack of adequate nutrition impacts on children's development and ability to take part in education. Holiday hunger pushes families into food poverty and insecurity. While many children from low-income families are entitled to free school meals during term time, there is currently no provision during holidays. Local voluntary organisations fill the gap in some places, but it's not universal. I read a report recently that said children were returning to school in a worse educational, health and development state than in which they left before the summer holidays. The report found that as many as 3 million children face the risk of food insecurity during the summer. The Welsh Assembly has acted to ensure that all local authorities make provision for those at risk of food poverty as part of the National Food and Fund programme. Similarly, in London, the Mayor's Fund has launched a kitchen social project this year, which helps children during the holidays who would be entitled to free school meals. This council is following in their footsteps and have agreed a small amount of funding to fund holiday hunger projects across the district, feeding our children during the school holidays and during other holidays. These are just examples of what councils are having to do because of the government's introduction of universal credit, which means people are waiting at least 4 weeks for the first payment, and it's paid in arrears. If claimants can demonstrate they're in a financial need, for example, they can't afford food or heating whilst waiting for the first payment, they can apply for an advance payment, which they have to pay back. As of August 2017, 590,000 people were on universal credit. Of those, 230,000, that's 39%, were in employment. And that's why I'm asking the Overview and Scrutiny Management Board to look at the links between the introduction of universal credit and the possible increase in the use of food banks, so that this Council's limited resources can be used to the best interest. And with that, Mr Mayor, I move the resolution.
Thank you, Mrs Cummins. Is that is accepted? Is the altered motion seconded?
Seconded, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hemingway, in seconding the altered motion, do you wish to formally speak now or reserve your right to speak until later in the debate?
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm proud to second the motion brought today by Councillor Cummins. As we have heard, people are having to resort to food banks more and more in this district, and we should be thankful that we have so many amazing volunteers who do give up their time and resources, some here in this chamber, to help their fellow citizens in desperate need. But the important question remains, why in a rich, modern country are people being driven to use food banks in increasing numbers? Why are some people in our society unable to even afford enough to eat? Poverty pay, insecure employment, the pay cap, pay freezes, welfare reform. 8 years of cuts and austerity imposed by the Conservative government have left many people, and often the poorest in our society, with a lot less to live on. And this is set against years of rising costs of living and out of control utility bills. And there is sadly the very real prospect that things will deteriorate as the government's flagship welfare reform, Universal Credit, is rolled out in Wakefield in November. Universal Credit is a potential catastrophe in the making. It has been delayed and pushed back by nearly 6 years. It has failed to deliver the promised savings and has caused misery, poverty and indebtedness wherever it has been trialled or implemented to date. It has pushed people just about coping over the edge, with half of all council tenants on universal credit in other parts of the UK now a month or more in rent arrears, placing their tenancies at risk and their family life in jeopardy. And now there is a growing body of evidence of the link between universal credit and the increasing use of food banks. A report published earlier this year by the UK's largest food bank provider, the Trussell Trust, indicated that the increase in food bank use was up to 4 times higher in universal credit areas than those without it. And the Trust are even clearer in their analysis of these stark figures and state that it is vulnerable people on universal credit with nowhere else to turn that is fueling the rise of food bank use. This link between universal credit and the increasing demand on food banks cannot be ignored. The use of food banks has not just apparently increased in isolation, as the Prime Minister and some National Conservative politicians would have us believe, but it is a direct result of 8 years of government policy. Just as when the government scrapped crisis loans in 2013, harsh cuts to welfare and support for the vulnerable have only one consequence, and that is to push those already desperate even further into poverty, misery and debt. As a local authority, we have a duty to investigate such matters and to ensure that we and the food banks who operate in our district are properly prepared to support those citizens who may find themselves with nowhere else to turn. And I welcome the additional measures outlined by Councillor Cummins earlier. The resolution today will ensure that the Council will have proper scrutiny on the reasons why people are using food banks in Wakefield, and this is about doing the right thing for our citizens. We have to ensure we have the right support in place, and I urge all members of Council to support this motion.
In accordance with procedure rules, an amendment to the original motion has been submitted. The amendment has been circulated to members prior to the meeting. Councillor Miss Stanby, do you want to withdraw your amendment, given that the original motion has now been altered? No. Thank you. Could you move? Could you move the amendment? Your amendment? Could you move your amendment?
Okay, in response to the motion tabled by Councillor Cummings, I do appreciate your amendment following my submission. I do believe that we should have a more proactive approach towards the rollout of universal credits in Wakefield. Currently, only claimants moving into the area are receiving universal credits. However, as you know, from November 2018, new claimants or those who experience a change in circumstances will also begin receiving universal credits. I believe that the new system will massively help those on 0-hour contracts and those seeking employment, as they'll no longer have the stop-start claim period which has caused hardship in the past. Benefits will be rolled on from 1 month to the next. It is designed to actually help in some instances. However, as with other new systems, there will be teething problems, and I think anyone who thinks otherwise is being naive. It'd be easier to identify other issues with a smaller sample, enabling us to be prepared for the increased uptake of universal credits and take appropriate preemptive action. I'd also like to raise a couple of other points regarding Councillor Cummings' motion. In September 1997, what was to become one of Wakefield's largest food banks was set up in a church in George Street. The organisation repeatedly requested funding from Wakefield Council, but at that time food banks were seen as an embarrassment by the governing body at the time. This is 1997. Personally, I find that unacceptable. Eventually they secured lottery funding, which has enabled them to provide sustainable help to those in need. Since the change in government in 2010, certain members of this council seem to feel that it's appropriate to showboat the number of food banks in the district. At the recent council meeting on the 28th of March this year, Councillor Cummings stated that over a 3-year period, the number of food banks and providers in the district had risen from 11 to 23. Yet today's motion notes that there are now 19 food banks and food aid providers. We seem to have lost 4 of those food banks in less than 3 months. Is this decrease due to the government's poverty alleviation policies, or possibly an inaccurate statement previously made? I'm also concerned about the claim that one of our district's food banks saw a 32% increase in usage from January to April this year. Is the council aware that a long-serving member of staff at one of our food banks was hounded out of her position for highlighting misuse of the service? People were returning again and again to collect food, which was then sold on. Instead of monitoring this abuse and protecting those truly in need, the staff member suffered a 6-month period of bullying before eventually leaving her much-loved job. So forgive me if I treat some of your figures with a slight cynicism. As with any other service, once we politicise something, we shut down debate, and it is the most vulnerable that suffer. Having experience of both homelessness and poverty, I appreciate the provision of food banks, which not only feed but clothe and support those in need. That someone cared enough to ensure that we were looked after made me appreciate however hard life could be, and it will be. No matter how poor or down or sick we can be, we will not face it alone. I found that the voluntary support given was rather uplifting and demonstrated compassion. I certainly never felt embarrassed to receive second-hand clothing or Christmas gifts. I also take issue with your comment about benefit freeze, although I notice it has been taken out. Since 2008, most benefits have risen by 21%, compared with average earnings of 11%. Certainly the 3 benefits that my family were in receipt of, until local elections recently, were increased in April this year above the rate of inflation. I do, however, accept that in 2016 some benefits were frozen until 2020. But surely it would have been better to investigate any impact this may have had on the use of food banks 2 years ago, and that's why I believe that we need to be more proactive and find out what effect universal credits will have on people before the introduction. I personally support the motion that the Overview and Scrutiny Management Boards should commission a full investigation, but I would request that we do take it further and we have the report ready by November of this year when it's introduced. We have the opportunity today, by voting with my amendment, to demonstrate to the people of Wakefield that we're here to represent, that we can put them first above party politics.
Thank you. Is the amendment seconded? Councillor Harvard? Would you like to speak now? Or reserve the right to speak?
Mr. Mayor, I would like to second this motion, but I would prefer to not make further comment because Councillor Stansby has made a wonderful case already. Thank you.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just want to rise and speak at some of the comments that have been made from opposite. She notes that there are some teething problems within the universal credit system. In my experience, teething problems are thousands of people waiting at 13 weeks plus for their benefits without any sort of money. So yes, food bank usage nationally is going up. We say we're looking forward to the universal credit system and the poverty sort of tackling measures this government are going to work out better. Yet, as I've said previously, the Prime Minister has delayed the rollout of universal credits within her constituency until the teething problems can be fixed. So if it can happen in her constituency, why not in Wakefield?
Thank you. Councillor Burton.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm actually delighted that Maureen's motion has been brought to us today, not least so we can give some recognition to the sterling work done by the food bank organisers and volunteers, especially the Nottingley Food Bank organisers and volunteers. It's a very disparate and varied group. I know the original meeting took place down at Trinity Methodist in Castleford. I think Tony Wallace were there, chaired by the then Methodist Minister Jill Brown. The Nottingham Food Bank runs from the community church, but the food is parcelled up and delivered from the Methodist church. There are a wide range of us that support it. This week I was flattered to receive a very welcome certificate of thanks for my personal support. But there are a lot of us, it's not just me, that do a lot of work down there, strictly by referral only, I might add, Mr. Mayor. There's a perception that people can walk in and demand food. That is not the case. People are limited to 3 food collections per crisis, whatever that crisis might be, on referral from police, social services, etc., etc. It's a tough process and it can be a daunting process. I've seen people very sheepish about walking in. We do our best to welcome them. I'm proud to be involved, Mr Mayor. We've also got a spin-off now that, using the full bank food, incidentally, that comes from our individuals and corporate supporters, the major retailers. They do us proud. We now provide holiday food as well, which we're developing for this year, the 7-week holiday. Thank you.
Councillor Cruz.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So, the history of food banks and their use is somewhat different to that what the Labour Party like to portray. The truth is that it was Yvette Cooper, as Secretary of State for Work and Pensions in the last Labour government, that actively and deliberately prevented civil servants from referring people in desperate need to food banks. And this is from a party that is supposed to care. This cynical policy was removed by Ian Duncan Smith when the Conservative government came to office in 2010. So naturally, food bank use increased because people got the help they didn't get before. The Trussell Trust first opened its doors in 1997, just as things were going to get better. But France already had food banks for 13 years because they are not unique to the UK. They exist all over Europe. And as for Jacob Rees-Mogg, the MP in question, he didn't say that the use of food banks was uplifting. He didn't imply for 1 second that being hard up and hungry was okay. He said that the generosity, the kindness and the community spirit showed by those supporting food banks was uplifting, which it is. I suspect that I am probably the only person in this chamber that has ever had to use a food bank. Yes? Yeah? No matter what walk of life you come from, the need to use a food bank could happen to anyone, because life is like that. I never thought I would have to use one, and I can tell you it is so humbling and you are so very, very grateful. So I would be grateful if the Labour group would stop trying to score political points and twisting words over this sensitive issue. Stop trying to pretend that you have some kind of unique understanding of it all and the way it works, because you don't. You really, really don't. Thank you.
Councillor Tully.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm going to rise to support the resolution put forward by Maureen and oppose the amendment. And I thought, starting off from today, that we might have been able to have some sort of consensus about food banks, because food banks are a disgrace in 2018 that we have food banks to feed people in the 6th largest or richest country in the world. But it's a political choice. There is a connection between austerity and food banks, and the principle is quite laudable actually when you start to roll 6 benefits into one. But then what they didn't realise is that we took £12 billion worth of funding out of it, and then we froze benefits. Then we tried to roll it out across, and if people are not aware, there was a court case that went to the High Court in London last week with 2 people, and the judgment said, I'll read what the judgment said, I'll make it quite quickly. In a landmark judgment handed out today at the High Court in London, Mr Justice Lewis ruled that the Secretary of State for Work and Pensions unlawfully discriminates against 2 severely disabled men who saw their benefits dramatically reduced when they moved from local authority and were required to claim universal credit. Because what happened was, these 2 people were severely disabled, and under the old rules would have qualified for severe disability premium and enhanced disability premiums as part of their benefit entitlement to severely disabled people. Universal credit removes that. Recently released figures by the DWP suggest that 500,000 individuals are in receipt of severe disability premium, or both the severe disability and the enhanced disability. These have been axed and are not available under universal credit. So, when I hear people over there start talking about we ain't got a clue, or we ain't got an idea about people and our people are struggling, we have now got 57% in this country
of people with at least one person working in the household relying on food banks. Because we've got a policy that says no wage rise under the name of austerity. And people are more realistically having to rely on food banks, people who are in work to make ends meet. And to try to suggest this is nothing other than that we tried to cover it up because it was embarrassing in 1997 is an absolute disgrace. I went to a training course last week for Universal Credit, and it was easier for us, so we decided to invite the DWP across. It might make it a bit easier for ordinary Joe public people like us to understand it, and neither did they understand how it worked as well. And these are the people that's responsible for rolling it out. We have got a major increase in food bank usage in our area because we have got people who are working on very little earnings. And we haven't yet rolled out Universal Credit, which is going to have a major impact on their weekly income. So it's important that we look at what that says in the resolution about letting this go to overview and scrutiny. But if we seem to think in this room today, or in this council chamber, that we've got all the answers about poverty and football, we haven't got all the answers, and you people have, you're in for a short shrift, I'm afraid, because I'll tell you this now. There is an hostile environment within the DWP. There's an hostile environment which has been greatly expressed in the last few weeks within the Home Office. We have got people within the departments deliberately creating havoc for families across these communities. We have got people waiting 41 weeks to go to an appeal to make sure that their benefits are put in place. So I'm fully behind the resolution that's been moved by Councillor Moore.
Steve, can I just... Point of order, Steve.
Point of order on the disability hire rate. You obviously have never claimed disability. Both rates are still available following the rollout in November. Also, do not accuse...
Whoa, just a minute.
Also, take issue...
Just a minute, Councillor.
Sit down.
Just a minute. Whoa, you go through chair. And first point of order can be answered. First point, then you can have your second point of order.
Right.
Mr Mayor, can I try and
No, just let me say, it's a point of order, because this councillor is saying that councillor is inaccurate.
No, hang on, Mr Mayor, with respect, a point of order relates to the way that the meeting is being run. You might not, and I know you're passionate about it, but you might not agree with what's being said, but that is debate, not a point of order. So I'd ask you to ask for a ruling, Mr Mayor. It's how the meeting is run is a point of order. Not that you don't like what somebody said.
Can I just listen to this advice?
Right. I believe it's clarification or point of information in that case. You're wrong. Secondly...
Can you just give us 2 minutes to check the legal side of it?
Okay.
This is what?
This is the Constitution and Council procedures.
This is the Council's Constitution, and there's been some confusion. 19.12, point of order. A member may raise a point of order at any time. The Mayor will hear them immediately. A point of order may only relate to an alleged breach of these Council's rules of procedure or the law. The member must indicate the rule or law and the way in which he or she considers it has been broken, the ruling of the Mayor on the matter will be final. I think what's confused you is this one. Personal explanation. A member may make a personal explanation at any time. A personal explanation may only relate to some material part of an earlier speech by the member, which may appear to have been misunderstood in the present debate. The ruling of the Mayor on the admissibility of a personal explanation will be final. So what we've got here is a difference of opinion. The answer to this problem is we will continue with the debate. The next speaker is Councillor Tennant King. No, so you've got a minute, Master Steve.
I never mentioned anything about irate. I said the severe disability premium and the enhanced disability element of the benefit have been reduced from universal credit. They don't appear any longer. So anybody that would have received an enhanced disability premium or a severe disability premium or a child disability premium under the old rules will not get them under universal credit. That's what I said. And then she's looking about irate. Irate has been removed. It actually has been removed now. It's called enhanced PIP these days. You can shake your head as much as you like, but I tend to spend quite a lot of time when I'm not here, you know, working through these cases on a day-to-day basis. That's the point I'm making, is that there will be a substantial reduction in money that will go to people in this area with the rollout of universal credit, which in turn could quite well lead to the use and the increased use of food banks. That's the point I was making. It's about anything else. And so I do support the resolution that's been put forward by my colleague, Councillor Maureen Cummins, and oppose the amendment that's been laid from the other side.
Next speaker is Councillor Tennant King.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. First of all, in answer to Councillor Cruz's, when she said about she's probably the only member there what's used a food bank. I haven't used a food bank personally, but I have used food parcels and soup kitchens, and that were called during the miners' strike. But to start with, well, I cannot believe that in 2018 that we are having to debate and propose a motion re food banks because of the ineptitude of our government. Not only food banks, but also the street kitchens and hungry children projects that are also on the increase in our district. Myself and my ward colleagues visit the FaithNet Food Bank we have in Featherstone and see for ourselves the impact this has on our many families it helps. Our own town council also provide help with donations of not only food but other things as well. We've provided 11 families with £50 fuel vouchers over the Christmas period, so they had light to eat and a means to cook a meal for their families. Our own town mayor, Claire Woodhead, as the food bank as a local charity this year to help raise not only needy funds, but to raise awareness too. So just for a moment, when you get home tonight and open your fridge and cupboards to peruse what you are having for tea, remember, some members of our communities haven't got or can afford that luxury. To be able to choose, like old Mother Hubbard found, the cupboard was there. That's why I support Councillor Cummins' motion.
Councillor Shaw.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to go into detail. You know, Steve's the expert on that, and there's far more experts in there on detail, right? What I am going to say is this, that my ward, and Councillor Crew and Councillor Scott's ward, is probably the most deprived ward in Wakefield District. And it's got a lot of people who claim benefits, it's got a lot of people who have kids, and who, it's already been said, who are being fed during school holidays. And that's what we should be talking about. We should be talking about the fact that, you see, Trump does some stupid thing, and for about 3 months nobody picks it up. And then guess what? Somebody photographs something, and they see the kids, and then everybody's picked it up. What we're talking about here are families and children who are going hungry on a regular basis in Wakefield District and indeed in all the country. And we're one of the richest countries in the world. We can always find money for different things when we want to find money. And by the way, a little bit of a statistic, because I know you like statistics, the fact that the government's own agency has turned around and said they ought to really scrap universal credit because it's not valuable for money. And that's their own agency. I'm sure you've read that, and I'm sure you've heard that. Which, I mean, I suppose if one of our agencies turned around to us and said it wasn't valuable for money, we'd all be looking at it again. But the real key about this, and it always will be, is what are we going to do? What are we going to do so that in future years the kids aren't hungry? We don't have food banks. That's what we need to be looking at. We need them now. You're right, we need them now. And why do we need them now? Because of what's happening. And I'll tell you what, it is universal credit. There's no doubt about that. Because I'll tell you what, in Airedale, I'll stand up here in October and in November and look at you. And in March next year, we'll look at you and I'll say, look at how my ward's affected. And it isn't just about food. Watch homelessness as well, because that's going to go up. So let's see what really happens, and then you can stand up and tell us.
Councillor Rowley.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support the resolution and oppose the amendment. It almost seems as if we're talking about a badge of honour that you've encountered a food bank, when in fact what it seems to be is a rush to the bottom. What we should be condemning is the incredible cuts in benefits that have taken place, that have made people in our community poorer, and all those people in work have had their subsidies removed at the same time as wages have remained essentially low. And that's the sadness. We've got a low-income economy. We've got people that are actually losing their benefits that were subsidising the employers. And now we're already praising earlier the amount of volunteers we've got that are doing great work in our community. We don't need more volunteers supplying food banks. We want people to have decent living wages that mean that they won't become homeless, that their kids are adequately fed, and that they have a decent standard of living. And that's what we should be complaining about and saying to this government. The opposition here are in control of government at the moment. Are they complaining about universal credit, or are they just saying, isn't it great that we're extending or measuring our food banks? And that doesn't seem to be coming over. What we should be asking is the people here, albeit a minority of the council, to say, stop this rubbish of universal credit and pay people decently so that they can have a decent standard of living. And we don't hear that in that debate. Say it, instead of saying, aren't we doing great with one food bank or another? It's appalling.
Councillor Crowe.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm a bit hard of hearing, and I thought I heard from the opposite side that this government were doing very well with food banks and what they were doing with them and what have you. My union branch, a branch, not the whole of the union, have given over £6,000 to food banks in the last 3 years, 3 or 4 years. It gave us £1,000 to set up the Hungry Kids campaign. Where would we have got the money for that? It wouldn't have been from government. And then we're donating things to food banks and everything else. I think it's a downright ashamed. You should be ashamed of yourselves how you're treating this. When we've got kids in our area in the 21st century starving. And they are starving in my ward, is some of them. And that while ever I've got breath in my body, I'll look after them kids and we'll feed them. I support the motion of Mrs Cummings and
Councillor Wassell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Food banks. Monica Graham may remember me making a very similar speech not many years ago, but funnily enough, my first contact with food banks was part of an industrial dispute orchestrated by the government of the day, which was your party. That's when I started going to food banks, because the government of the day, your party, tried to starve us back to work. Well, they didn't succeed in starving me back to work, because myself and family members not only attended food banks, but we sourced the food for the food banks, and we ran food kitchens, and we ran soup kitchens. And I benefited from that, because I could go off picketing all day against your government, and then I could go and ask them to wait before I went off. So they didn't starve me back to work, but they are still continuing with the same vein. You're trying to starve people into submission, into the submission of universal credit. Now, I volunteer at a number of food banks. I didn't declare at each one individually, but I do see what goes off, and they're not all run by Trussell Trust. But I'll tell you this, the Trussell Trust one in Normanton, my area, it's only small, it's a converted garden shed in a park, is where we run our food bank from, and we've seen a 25% increase in demand. Now, statistics are just statistics until you turn 25% of what into what? Well, we're running at 6 tonne of food. We're now running at 8 tonne of food into the Normanton area, raised locally, supported locally, and distributed locally. 8 tonne of food. And we ain't even got universal credit yet. And you're saying, bring it on. I'm very disappointed that you find this opportunity to use for your maiden speech, and all you can do is try and amend a resolution on food bank usage, and whether we should have a review into it so that we can see how best to support it, and that's the best you can come up with for your maiden speech. You ought to be embarrassed. I support the motion, and sadly, because it's only a tweak and a political statement that she's trying to make, I will oppose the amendment.
Councillor Foster.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have to say, I am staggered to sit and look at your face at some of the comments that colleagues on this side have made. With Councillor Wassell, we volunteer every Sunday night. You don't have to make it, I can see your face. We volunteer every Sunday night at the Trinity Mission Food Bank. That food bank is aimed predominantly at single people. Single people who have already been hit the hardest by some of the benefit changes. What you're actually looking at now are people that are sanctioned because they failed to attend appointments, because they didn't get the text message. They no longer have secure accommodation because the bedroom tax have forced them out of the secure accommodation. They are now sofa surfing wherever they can. They come down to that food bank on a Sunday night for companionship. We provide access to all sorts of other support access agencies, whatever. It's not just a food bank. But the fact that since I've been volunteering there 3 years, it's gone up over 100%. These are young, single people, both men and women, some gentlemen that I went to school with. And so consequently, I feel that to be in a position where we had the manager of the DWP come to speak to us and say at the food bank meeting, well, what do you do to support these single people that are sanctioned for whatever? And do you know what the answer was? They direct them to the nearest food bank. And I can't see that's acceptable. And as a consequence, that need is growing. And it's wrong. Wrong in this 21st century. And I have to say, I am surprised that some of you sat over there can see that it is so right. I oppose this amendment and support the motion.
Councillor Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. When I saw this motion, I took it down to the local food bank where I support, and also to Trinity Mission, where, as I say, I'm on the board on there. And I said, what do you think of this? What do you think of this motion? What Maureen's put in? They both know Maureen, and both organisations said, can you tell it back to Maureen? This is an excellent resolution. This is something what we need. What's happening with at the moment is, as Glenn rightly said, is by voucher system at the food bank, so you have to go along by the voucher. It's there as a temporary help, so it's not intended to be a permanent solution. It's there to help people over while they're going through bad times, for that temporary time. 2 years ago, the University of Oxford Department of Sociology, I think, published a paper about what Councillor Foster's just been talking about sanctions and the effects that had on food banks, the increase in demand. What's now showing nationally, not just through the Trussell Trust, and by the way, the food bank in my ward isn't a member of the Trussell Trust, it's independent, but also other organisations have shown that change in benefit, just the changes themselves, are enough to cause hardship, even of a temporary measure. But then when you're in that temporary hardship zone, it's then hard to come out of it, even when times get better. And what the report also shows is that the introduction of universal credit is actually a major change, especially for the delay before it comes on, is a major change that's causing problems, it's causing increase in usage of the food banks. So I think this motion is a very good motion, what's from Maureen, because we know the picture nationally, and even the government has accepted that there is a rise through the benefit changes nationally. We need to know what the picture is locally. And the food banks have shown me that what they do now, and I know they do this in Castleford, they work more closely together on all the accounts, because there's an increase in demand for their resources, but their resources aren't infinite. So by looking at it locally, we will also be able to see how we can better assist them, and how together, and how we as a council can better assist them and other agents. So I support this motion, and I'm just surprised at the amount of politics came over. Yvette Cooper's name was mentioned. Well, I can say this. That meeting is setting up what Glenn referred to. Yvette couldn't get there personally, but she sent two, not just one, but two of her representatives from her office to that meeting to see how she can help. And she's always been in touch with the two organisations I talked about, and also the Salvation Army. And she's visited other centres as well within the ward. So I can say definitely she is 100% what the food banks are doing in Castleford, and I'm sure in Pontefract as well.
Councillor Spade.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm pleased to support Maureen's resolution, and I oppose the amendment. More and more people today are struggling to make ends meet. I mean, we've heard about that. People are just telling us now. And household food budgets are definitely under strain. The sheer increase in the number of food banks is clear evidence of this. We just can't deny it. 10 or 12 years ago, there were only a very small number of food banks. Many people using them might have lost their jobs, had a pay cut, be on 0-hour contracts, they might have faced unexpected bills, relationship breakdown, become sick, be fleeing domestic violence, disabled, or experiencing benefit difficulties. The reasons for the use of food banks are numerous, but it's also important to note that people using them are not all homeless or unemployed. Many people turning up at food banks have got mortgages and are in work. But there's no doubt that austerity measures and universal credit have had a huge impact on people's lives. Benefit levels appear to no longer cover the cost of daily essentials. There's also no doubt that people and organisations have responded magnificently to the food crisis. Food banks represent a practical and caring response to seeing others struggle, and our charitable instincts are commendable. But the fact remains, food banks shouldn't be necessary. I read something the other day that quoted an Oxfam report stating that the richest 1% of people living in the UK have 20 times the wealth of the total owned by the poorest 20%. The UK is in the top 10 of the world's richest nations. Food poverty in a rich country is a national scandal, and we should all be ashamed that there are children in our district who are going hungry. I welcome a full investigation into the use of food banks across our district because obviously, as Maureen said in her resolution, the more we can understand the situation, the better equipped we are as a council to help.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. We all know on this side of the chamber about food banks and what austerity has brought, not just to Wakefield but around the country, which causes suffering for the parents and the children. And I read the other day in a paper that one school, thankfully not in the Wakefield district, they were buying a washing machine because the children were going to school with dirty clothes. The parents couldn't afford the electric to turn on the washing machine or go to the laundry. What state of affairs this country is in with this government. Earlier on, Maureen made some statistics about over 1.2 million food parcels handed out in 2017-18. And what a number that is. But it just shows you how it's increased, because in 2010, I say there was only, but there was just 41,000 food parcels handed out. So to say there's no crisis, there is a major crisis. And I'll go back to say again, we all know about the food banks, what people have to do when they apply for one to get a food bank parcel. And we also know on this side of the house about what the government's tax system is when it's giving billions and billions of pounds away to the wealthiest 1% in this country, while yet we are struggling to force people into poverty and food banks. Thank you, Mr Mayor. I support the motion.
Thank you. Councillor Box.
Just briefly, Mr Mayor, it's important we put this debate into context. Since the Conservatives got in 2010, our budget has been reduced over those 8 years by £128 million. And yet those opposite then criticise us for making cuts to services. Look at what's happening in terms of the police. Police budgets are being cut. Then the Conservatives say, well, that's nothing to do with the increase in crime or some of the incidents that we've seen. So they're making decisions nationally and locally. They're saying, well, there's no link between those national decisions and what's happening locally. I actually mentioned about the £7.8 billion that local government needs. And not one person opposite, not one of you, said a word. Why not? That is supported, that figure by the way, by Conservatives up and down the country. But those in Wakefield take a different view. Isn't it strange that if you're well off, the incentive you need to work is to give you tax cuts? If you've got very little, the incentive is we'll take a bit of what you've got, so you've got even less. Isn't that strange? Isn't it strange? The party opposite came in obsessed about austerity. They're obsessed by it. They're addicted to it. And they've used it as a weapon. That's what they've done. They've used it as a weapon. Look at society now. Is anybody seriously telling me that the fabric of society is better over the last 8 years? Of course it's not. It's got worse, and it's going to get worse as long as you pursue. It's a failed ideology, is austerity. It's failed, it's had its day. It's a nonsense. It's no good shaking your head. If you think that's debate, I'm afraid you've got a lot to learn. That's not debate, just shaking your head. It's a failed ideology. So if you want to come and quote statistics, I'll trade them any day of the week with you. Any day of the week I'll trade them with you. And if you want to defend austerity, you try and defend it, and I'll give you cases of where it's affecting people's lives. And actually, you know, I take the point you make, I haven't used a food bank. And unless you have, none of us, I accept that. You know, what I'm saying is, none of us can really know. Hang on.
Excuse me just a minute.
Let's do it.
Speak through the chair, please.
Do it the traditional way. I mean, I was actually supporting what you were saying, and unless you know, you've experienced that, none of us can really know. And I'm not for a second suggesting that every single member of the Conservative Party doesn't care. That's not the case. Of course it's not. Nor do I suggest that I or anybody else has got the answers to everything. What I am saying is that you can't look at this debate in isolation. You've got to look at what this Conservative government is doing across the piece. And once you do that, then you start to understand why you've got an increase in food banks, why you've got an increasing demand for people going to food banks. Don't look at it in isolation, colleagues. Look at the big picture. Only by looking at the big picture can you understand what this government is doing. And we will fight it every step of the way, both in this council chamber and nationally.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Rhodes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In support of the resolution and in opposition of the amendment, I'm not going to repeat but support every comment that's been made here today from this side of the chamber on the food banks. But what I am going to comment on is our opposition members. You're new, you have a lot to learn. I suggest you start learning. Some of the words that were expressed in this amendment today left my blood curdling. For instance, I recall accusations of this council showboating on how many food banks we have. That's a disgrace. Absolute disgrace. And the use of that kind of language does nothing to your party, you as an individual, and the ward that you represent, where you have poverty. We all have poverty, but there are stretches and pieces of poverty in every ward. And my only sadness is today, and I hope the press pick up, and the Wakefield's pressman has gone, that you identified this council with showboating on behalf of individuals across this authority who have the indignity of having to go to a food bank in the first place. It's not on, it's not acceptable, and I suggest that your counterpart behind you takes you in and gives you some lessons in what is acceptable in a democratic situation and not words like that. And secondly, I believe I also picked up, and my colleagues may be able to help me on this one, that you considered the use of universal credit to be advantageous to those on zero contract hours. Instead of decrying social contract hours, you believe this is going to be a crutch to those people who tomorrow may not know if they've any hours at all, and that's acceptable. Acceptable in the 21st century to have people relying on that kind of method that you think is acceptable. It's not. And as far as we're concerned here, we have had experience of food banks and food parcels long before some of you even thought about it. And we have had experience of having to go out and raise money to feed families. And we have had the experience long before either of you ever knew about it. I'm particularly disappointed about people saying, we've had experience. We've all had experience. But that experience has led us to understand more and more about the needs of people who have to resort to this situation, where they have to be vetted to know if they're going to get food for their families, where parents themselves are going without to make sure that their children are fed. So don't come here teaching us any lessons. We've had all those lessons and we've learned from them. And I hope today the new members who have contributed in such a way today will actually themselves learn from today's meeting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Can I just say, at this stage of the debate, I think it's been given a very good airing, And I would ask Councillor Harvey, do you wish to speak now as the seconder of the motion?
Sorry, no further comment.
Say again, Councillor
I
Harvey.
have no further comment on this.
No more comment. Thank you. So move in progress. Councillor Mrs Cummins, as mover of the original motion, do you wish to reply?
Thank you. First of all, the emotion and the passion in this room at this moment in time, and particularly on this side of the chamber, fills me with absolute pride. The amount of councillors in this room today that actually volunteer at food banks. Get your calculator out, Councillor Stansby. I've visited all 19 food banks, 1 soup kitchen, 1 soup trolley and 2 hot food providers. How many does that amount to? 23. 23. The reason I think that you don't want to refer to the benefits freeze is, and I'm going to put this in really, really simple terms. The benefit freeze came in April, I believe it was 2016. You might want to quote me in a couple of years' time on that one, but I think it was April 2016. And it froze at that point. £10 in 2016 is not going to be worth £10 in 2020. It's going to be worth more like £7.50 or £8. So that's the reason you wanted to take the benefit freeze out, because you know it isn't working. Finally, I've listened to everything that's been said and sympathy for visiting and actually using a food bank, but I could go on about the food banks when I was growing up that my family visited and my family had to take charity. I again pay tribute to those volunteers who actually step up to the plate and actually help those people now who are suffering from food poverty, fuel poverty and energy poverty, who will be increased after the introduction, I have no doubt, in November 18, that will increase. And I only hope that those volunteers continue to do the absolute good work that they do. All 23 of them, all food providers in one form or another. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. We will now take the amendment to the vote. To clarify this is to determine whether the amendment from the Councillor Ms Stansby should become the new substantive motion. You all clear on that? Please show all those in favour of the amendment. Please show all those in favour of the amendment. Please show all those against the amendment. Are there any abstentions? The amendment is... We now revert back to the altered motion as detailed by Councillor Mrs Cummins. The debate on the amendment has covered many points. However, does any member wish to speak on the altered motion? May I remind members that speeches must be directed to the question under discussion or to a personal explanation or point of order. No speech may exceed 5 minutes. Councillor Ahmed.
I think there's a number of things raised within the motion that you should just accepted the amendment, because it is an amendment. There was nothing that refuted what you said within that. It allowed the opportunity for the council to address or do an investigation, as you've suggested in there. But obviously there was quite a lot of inaccuracies within the original motion, which is why Councillor Stanby's amendment was the correct amendment, which resulted in you changing the motion. I do think it was just basically there was a bit of, could have come together on the motion, but obviously you wanted to make sure that it was your particular motion on there. The issue of food banks, as Councillor Stansby and other members have pointed out, is not a new phenomenon to this country, and nor are you a working class hero like I've pointed out a number of times to you. I've pointed it out here, this is the working class issue and the issue of supporting people with benefits or poverty. Yeah.
Continue.
The motion is an amended motion in itself. It's not the procedure. The point of order is inaccurate. I'm speaking on the motion. If you look at the motion, I'm speaking directly to the motion.
Point of order, Mr. Mayor, is still referring to an amendment that's been lost in this council, and the only debate should be on the amendment.
He's incorporating his comments on the amended motion, and he has a right to speak.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll just sum it up really. At the end of the day, those people that have been, my point was obviously in terms of the motion and itself, food banks, there's a Conservative group here, all of us, volunteer and support. We can list the things that we do. Islamically, as the month of Ramadan's passed, a significant number of Muslims within Wakefield have contributed to food banks in this country. And when the miners' strike happened, the textile workers, predominantly Pakistanis, contributed to that as well. So let's not, in terms of what Councillor Stansby raised and what we all raised as Conservative group was, this issue of food banks has come to this council on a number of occasions, and the idea of poverty, which isn't new to this country. The statistics that you mentioned about the richest in this country existed whilst the Labour Party was in government as well. So all these things are not new. Food banks existed then. The idea of washing machines in school, I was doing, when I first qualified in 2001, we had washing machines in school then. We were giving free school uniforms out to children, and we knew that there were carers at home then. It's not new. It depends on the schools that you worked in, and it is a disgrace, you're right, but it's a disgrace that's continued a long time in this country. And you're right, that's what we're drawing attention towards today, was that...
Can you give the councillor a chance to speak, please?
But like I said, at the end of the day, we could have supported the motion, but in terms of there's a number of inaccuracies in there, and as Councillor Cruz raised, the Member of Parliament that you mentioned didn't actually say that comment. He didn't say that comment, so we can't support something that contains inaccuracies within there. And we gave an opportunity for the council to accept that, but it was rejected.
Would anybody else like to speak on the altered motion?
And I move the motion be put to vote, please.
Council, a closure motion has been moved. Is it seconded?
Seconded, Chair.
It is seconded. Thank you. This will now be put to the vote. As a point of clarification, should the closure motion be agreed, then anyone who has not yet done so will not be able to speak on the amended motion. All in favour of the closure motion, please show. Any against? Any abstentions? That is carried.
So you just go...
I'm doing it here now,
yeah. So, no, you've got to take a vote of the alteration. That's where we are.
Right. And I'm now going to take a vote on the altered motion. Now going to take a vote on the altered motion. All those in favour of the altered motion, please show. Please show those against the altered motion. Any abstentions? It's carried. The final motion is from Councillor Morley. Would you please move your motion to Council?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Where to begin, Mr. Mayor? I think it's the straw that broke the camel's back at the minute with Mr. Grayling, but let's just go back a little bit further, Mr. Mayor. Let's just look at passenger usage and the passenger experience on the railways since privatisation in the 90s. Mr. Mayor, people have complained about overnumber, overcrowded, massive fares, the entire shambles that has been the privatisation of the railways. Let's not forget the time when also, you know, companies couldn't even provide the service anymore, couldn't give back over to the government, making a profit, and what do they do? Privatise it again. Could things get any worse? Well, yes, they did, a couple of weeks ago. When this new timetable was introduced, the number of cancellations, the number of people not getting to work on time was horrendous. And for the life of me, I cannot understand why they put forward this new timetable when they knew they couldn't commit to it, when they knew it was going to work. Network Rail and other rail bosses was telling the government well before then, this is not ready, we are not prepared for it, but they still ploughed on with it. It has been an absolute shambles, Mr. Mayor. It's interesting to note as well the number of rail fare users been dropping over the last 12 months as well. We all use the railways. All hard-working people want to do is get to work on time, do the job and get home to the families, and we can't even do that. But Mr. Grayling seems to be blaming everybody. Network Rail, which I think he's in charge of, so he's blaming them. He's blaming local government now. The leaders of the local councils are responsible. But he doesn't seem to take any responsibility himself. I'm sure there's reasons why the Prime Minister won't want to sack him, and that's obviously down to Brexit, but we shan't go there, because I don't think we've got the time in this debate to go any further. But Mr. Mayor, the controlling group of this council think enough's enough. He needs to do the honourable thing and resign, and we need to... I fully support what the Labour Party is saying nationally as well. Let's nationalise the rail services. Let's get them back to working and putting the profit back into services, putting the profit back into infrastructure, not into greedy profit holders. Mr. Mayor, I move the resolution.
Thank you, Councillor Morley. Is the motion seconded? Councillor Mrs Masterman, is it in seconding the motion, do you wish to formally speak now or reserve your right to speak until later in the debate?
I'll speak now, Mr. Mayor. I use trains on a daily basis to get to and from work, and I didn't think the service could get any worse. I was wrong. Since this timetable change, which actually took effect on the 20th of May, so I've suffered it for a month, we have less services, services cancelled, overcrowding is worse, there are less carriages, and there are long delays. Now, we were promised when Arriva took over the franchise, there'd be more rolling stock, fail. There'd be new trains, fail again. There'd be refurbished trains, yet another failure. And there'd be better service. Well, I don't even have to speak on that. That's an abject failure. If the Transport Secretary cannot sort this out, he should go. Even though we won a vote of confidence by a mere 20 votes. I support the motion.
Thank you. Does any member wish to speak on the motion? May I remind members that speeches must be directed to the question under discussion or to a personal explanation or point of order. Councillor Harvey.
Mr. Mayor, I would like to begin with my thanks for being granted permission to speak for the first time in this chamber. It is a true honour to represent the residents of Wakefield Rural Ward. I'm here today to speak strongly against Councillor Matthew Morley's motion, calling for the immediate resignation of the Secretary of State for Transport, Chris Grayling. Before I go any further, I will clarify the government's position on the latest rail service interruptions in the north of England. The Prime Minister and the Secretary of State for Transport have both agreed that the disruption experienced by passengers on the Northern Network is completely unacceptable. They both understand the frustration of passengers and the inconvenience caused. They have also promised the affected passengers will be compensated at the train service operator's expenses. Now, let's take a quick look into what has happened. The recent massive disruption of Northern Network Rail occurred in May and in June, was caused by a timetable change, as Councillor Morley has pointed out. But this is to enable all lines mentioned above to run extra services at its undergoing the biggest modernization in history. The key issue behind the disruption is Network Rail's failure to deliver electrification on part of the network in time for the timetable change. This results in a number of knock-on effects. Admittedly, there have been failures across the network which are unacceptable. The operator was not sufficiently prepared to deliver timetables changes at this scale, despite assurance to the controversy. Mr. Mayor, I hope you agree with me. The challenges faced have been unparalleled in building a modern railway fit for purpose. Despite this government is determined to deliver the biggest rail modernization program since the Victoria times. Between 2015 and 2020, the government will have spent over £13 billion to transform Northern transport. The commitment from this government will deliver high-quality, well-paid jobs and the modern transport infrastructure where business can invest, develop and grow. Mr. Mayor, Councillor Morley's motion does nothing to improve life for the people of Wakefield. It is nothing more than a cheap political point. I cannot and will not defend Network Rail for its recent failures, nor can I stand by and allow a fellow councillor who ought to know better to waste your time. Rather than putting forward pointless motion on subjects he has not got any control, I would ask Councillor Morley and indeed all colleagues in the chamber to ditch party political bickering and work for the greater good of the city. Instead of complaining, let us work together with local partners, local business and the government itself to bring business and investment to the district. Where we bicker between ourselves, other cities get ahead. So ditch the rhetoric, put aside our divisions, and there is no limit to what we can achieve for the people in Wakefield. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Swift.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Now, of course, Grayling should go. The list of reasons why Grayling should go is endless. Virgin Trains East Coast, the backtracking on the electrification across the Pennines, the list is endless. But coming to this particular issue, now, as the previous speaker mentioned, the scale of change on the timetable is enormous. It's been enormous for a while. Grayling's department is in there, up to its eyeballs, membership of all the different working parties. The idea that Chris Grayling suddenly found out there was a problem on May the 21st, and then, as has been said, starts to blame everybody under the sun. This notion doesn't stand up at all. The key problem that affects this part of the world, which is that construction on a tunnel job outside Bolton has been massively delayed, was fully known all over the press before Christmas, after Christmas, early on this year when we were in the consultative meetings. Some colleagues were in there as well, and Northern Rail came along and they were talking about the timetable. Northern Rail said they were in trouble doing the timetable. I'm talking January, February, They said they had to go ahead with the changes because all the other operators were. And I think this comes to the bigger issue. Yeah, Grey Lynn should go. But the bigger issue is we've got an interlocking, interdependent rail system, and we've got a fragmented, privately owned operator system. Northern Rail couldn't stop. It's a bit like the First World War. The railway timetables determined it. They couldn't stop. They had to go ahead. They knew they'd got big problems. But they couldn't stop because the other operators were changing their timetables. The other operators had contractual entitlements. The other operators would be making claims financially if they had to change theirs back. We were even affected by the knock-on from the huge changes on Thameslink in London because the trains that come into Westgate were changed because of that. And yet, everything was locked in. Where was the plan B? The delays on a tunnel job in Bolton, it's hardly the first major engineering job to overrun. Are we saying that Grey Lynn's department didn't have a plan B? What do we do if there's a major overrun? And all that happened was they just went on and carried on up to the cliff. Now, those are the reasons why not just Grey Lynn should go, but those are the reasons why we actually have to have a railway system that's based on what the needs of the service are, a public service-driven system, and an integrated system, so that we're not dealing with a patchwork of different owners, all with their own contractual entitlements, and all with a right to say, my bit goes ahead, it's up to you to do what yours are doing. Fully support the motion. Let's look at the wider picture as well. Let's look at the need to actually reform that railway system, integrate it, and change its ownership so that it can be genuinely responsive to the public interest in this country.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Tully.
I'll not detain the council. I'm just going to rise to support the motion, and if we're going to start talking about, let's take the party politics out of it, well, I actually thought that for the first 5 minutes there was somebody in this chamber with a spokesman on behalf of Chris Grey Lynn and Network Rail and Northern Rail. It's a disgrace. I travel on trains every day of the week. I've done for 30 years. I travel down to Chesterfield most days of the week when I'm not here. Yeah, they don't turn up, or they're going to turn up, and they've promised us for the last 30 years what they're going to do with them. New trains, old trains. You can have some of them London no trains, and we'll make them new trains up here, the league. They don't turn up, the cold, the freezing, the toilets don't work. And there's an added difficulty now that they've spent the last God knows how long trying to take guards off them to make them even more unsafe than what they already are. But the whole system of transport on the railways needs major overhaul. It needs nationalised. In fact, it's nationalised now. The difficulty is the people that own all these franchises and nationalised companies in other countries. You know, we're all right. We don't want to nationalise the railways, but we're quite happy for foreign companies in other countries to own 90% share in different railway franchises we've got up and down the country. Fully support the motion moved by Councillor Matthew Morley. Chris Grey Lynn is a total disgrace. He's a disgrace to the portfolio that he holds. You don't get two monkeys about the people who have to try and travel the length and breadth of this country or travel across counties to get to work. Don't care whether people get home at 7 o'clock or 8 o'clock at night, or whether or not they've lost their job as a result of not going to work because they sit in the ivory towers in Transport House and are so far removed from what's going on in the north and what's so far removed what's going on in ordinary working people's lives. And the quicker we have a government that's prepared to look at the nationalisation of railways in its entirety, that day can't come soon enough. And long may that day be, probably just months away, hopefully, and I support the resolution.
Councillor Collins.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yeah. So in rising to support this motion, I'd just like to say that understanding the frustrations and offering sympathy to people who have been disrupted by this chaos is simply not good enough. Neither is it good enough that people have been in a position where they've lost out on work, lost appointments because of this chaos. Now, until we get a Labour government that's going to improve, and this is in Chris Grey Lynn's own words, the knackered old trains of the north, it's about time he stepped aside and let somebody else have a go at this shambles that he's created.
Councillor Box.
Yeah. I like the idea that we should not raise political issues in a political council chamber. and all get behind the government. Well, look, if the government ever do anything that's okay, I'll say so, the truth, and I have done in the past. But the truth is that overall, they're totally and utterly incompetent. I've never seen a bigger shambles in my life, is the truth. It's the truth. A complete and utter shambles, your government is. It's been raised in Parliament this afternoon, right? Let me just tell you what was raised in Parliament this afternoon by an Labour MP, Lisa Nandy. She's got hold of some Department for Transport emails in which officials discuss propaganding myths to divert attention from route closures, and the government knew 2 years ago what was going to happen. And what did Theresa May say? Oh, I never comment on leaked emails. Well, that's a great thing to say. That's great. Let's all work together, eh? You tell me, how much per head of population is spent between the south of England and the north of England? And you tell us not to play politics. It's at least 10 to 1, if not more, per head of population is spent on transport in the south than in the north. And how about this one? Let's play politics. East Coast Main Line, as has been said by Kevin, is making a profit that goes into the public purse to help with, everything. So what do you all lot do? Oh, let's privatise it. Great. Great. That's the kind of business you like, no doubt. Privatise it, give it to your friends in the city. So, I don't mean you personally, I mean, your party. And then what do? Virgin get hold of it. I think it's Stagecoach, is it? But certainly Virgin get hold of it. And then what do? Oh, we've made a bit of a miscalculation. Can you let us out of the contract? And what does that cost the taxpayer? Over £1 billion. So that's your business friends here. Let's all work together. Not a chance. Not a chance, as I said earlier. On every single occasion, we will raise the incompetence of your government. Every single occasion. And don't you tell me about what I need to do about attracting business. That's what I'll do. That's what I do as leader. Which is why, actually, we've got one of the fastest growing GDPs in the whole of the region. That's why. Because we do attract business. Business friendly. But we don't just give things away to the private sector like you do. That's what you do. If that's your idea of working together, we actually want none of it. And actually, privatisation, look at what people say. That's what they want. It's an idea whose time has come. And I'll tell you what, when there's an election, we won't do what your party did last year, because in Wakefield, Chris Grayling made a promise that certain investment in the north of England would go ahead. It turned out, read the Yorkshire Post, I'll send you the article if you want, he lied. He lied. And that's why he actually should resign. He's lied to the north of England about investment in the north, and he should go. He's not a friend of the north. The Tories aren't friends of the north, never ever have been, never will be. So we will continue at every meeting, I promise you, to make it political.
Thank you, Councillor Loughlin.
Yes, it was just about your comments, Councillor Harvey, relating to working together. Well, in fact, there's a few people here who have been working together for quite a number of years now to try and improve things locally. And it's quite small beer, really, when you look at what's going on in London, the money that's gone into King's Cross, St Pancras, Crossrail, millions and millions and millions of pounds are still going to be spent down there. And that helps the economy down there, but we're still suffering round here with our development. And on the 11th of May, we went to a meeting, myself and Councillor Burton, just over there, to discuss the specifics of what improvements we were going to get on the Pontefract-Nottingham line. And, we've been promised quite a lot of stuff, actually. Some of it's going to be delivered, but there's all these adjustments that are now coming in. So this morning, I happened to be at the hairdresser's, and the hairdresser said he can't get on the train half the time. So again, we're failing hugely, given what is going on in the south of England with a huge investment, so your government needs to look to itself. And actually, I'm sorry, but Chris Grayling has to go.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morley, as mover of the motion, you have the right to reply. In exercising your right to reply, of reply, may I remind you that no new matter can be introduced.
I'm taking it Councillor Harding got the short straw at the Conservative group meeting then to defend Chris Grayling, Mr Mayor, because not one of her colleagues could take to their feet to defend him. So thank you very much for showing your support on this resolution. I fully appreciate it, and so does the controlling group. Councillor Harvey, I'm sure that the people you represent, the people of this district, and the thousands of people in this country will appreciate your comments that this is a waste of time. No, this is not a waste of time. This is affecting people's days, people's train journeys and people's lives. It's not a waste of time. Remember that one, please. Mr Mayor, I fully support this resolution. Chris Grayling must resign after the comments have been made. The Yorkshire Post are coming out against him. The press are coming out against him. The One North campaign is against him. Mr Mayor, Grayling must go.
Thank you, Councillor. If we're not having a recorded vote, I'm going to take it to the vote. Please show all those in favour of the motion. Please show all those against the motion. Are there any abstentions?
Close.
That is carried. That was the last item on the agenda. Thank you, colleagues, for your attendance. The next council meeting is on the 25th of July. I now declare the council meeting closed, and if anyone wishes to come back to the Mayor's Parlour, they can have some